Welcome, everyone. And we'll start with any, do you want to do amendments first, David?
Sure.
Any amendments?
No amendments.
Okay. Any comments from the public regarding items that are not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Announcements.
So I just have a couple announcements, although I could go on. We're at the start of the school year. Things remain to be extremely positive. We're still working out a few of our bugs with transportation. We apologize for some of the late arrivals, although we've cut that down pretty significant. But here at the middle school, we also have an open house scheduled for Thursday, the 24th, 6:15 to 8:35. And I do want to just let the board know that we had on Rosh Hashanah, which was Monday, we had student pictures taken with, or scheduled and taken for our athletic program at the high school, and that was not okay. And I made an agreement with you folks that we would work to avoid any of those holidays and to try to minimize any student critical programming, sports programming, major exams, things of that nature, and that did not happen. So I will be working with my central office and also with the administrators to figure out what went on and how we can make sure that doesn't happen again. So just wanted to let you know that. Some of you may have been called or informed about that or noticed that.
Is there a plan to retake pictures for those?
That has been stated. We haven't come out with a schedule or anything like that. So we are, again, absolutely understand that people were put out, had to make some decisions. Students did, parents did on that day. And again, I'm apologetic to that, and we need to figure out how to make sure this doesn't happen again. So that's all I have.
All right. We have announcements from our student rep.
Yeah, sure. It's homecoming for the high school this weekend. It's a month early, but there'll be a homecoming parade and float building on Saturday, followed by tailgating and a soccer game that night and a homecoming dance. So it's definitely a busy day. And families are obviously invited to tailgate and to buy spots for that. And also on Friday, we'll have a school-wide pep rally.
Great. Thank you. Any other announcements from board members? All right. We'll move on to agenda item 6, city and school collaboration.
So Elizabeth and I, as you know, regularly meet with the city. We have not had a meeting since our last one. And actually, we have to kind of get back on our agenda planning. I don't know that we have one scheduled. Usually it's every couple of weeks, although there's been a fair amount of conversation, as you know, in the past with the city and some of the things that are going on. So we'll be setting that up.
Good. All right, agenda item 7, the superintendent's report.
So under my report, I do have the discussion about the rebel name. And I also would like to just kind of go through some steps and allow for the board to have some discussion with me about that. I placed at your side some of those recommendations for you to consider. So let me just kind of read through what I'm thinking about here at this time. Again, these are under suggested next steps regarding the rebel name. I think that I would strongly recommend that the board come up with, I don't know if a goal statement would be right, but a charge, something of that nature currently, given what you've heard to date. And that charge would be specific to the rebel name. An example might be, and I've included here, would be to allow for community input and dialogue specific to the South Burlington High School rebel's name and determine if the rebel's name is causing disrespect and should be changed. Again, just an example. I offer some other ideas around some next steps. Some of this has been fostered by conversations that we've had with our public in the past, our students as well. Those next steps could include a panel discussion on the rebel's name with the goal of gathering additional perspectives and thoughts on the issue, facilitated by an outside facilitator. communicate with area high schools that have considered changing or have changed their name, and what they went through. Hold a student debate on the reasons for keeping the name and the reasons for changing the name, again, facilitated by a trained outside individual. Ask the high school administration to offer their thoughts and ideas going forward relative to the Rebels name. And again, the charge, back to the school board is to provide some rationale for keeping or changing the name. If changing the name, if changing the Rebels name, determine the process for and selecting the new name. If not changing the Rebel name, work to provide a definition of what the high school Rebel name means and to communicate it broadly. So those are kind of the next steps. That was kind of the gate that we came out of last time when we met. Kind of some directions from you to me around what would be some next steps. So really looking at a goal or a charge, and then considering perhaps some or different options to move forward. So let me pause.
Questions or comments for David from the board?
My first question is just one of understanding on your first next step, because panel discussion, do you envision who the panel would be composed of?
I mean, I think it would be important to have, a little bit of some pre-screening on a panel, determining that. Again, I think we've had some individuals here that have presented, and they've provided, I think, really valid points of view and facts. Those would be some individuals that I think would be important. I also think there's individuals that have come forward and who would like to voice their thoughts and ideas in a very organized way to include students. So again, that's kind of my thinking around that panel. And again, I say that because I don't know, although you, the board, may feel like this has been talked about a lot, but there's always the concern that when something this big happens, that maybe some would say, well, this is the first I've heard of it. Mm-hmm. And we hear that a lot in some of our work. And so I'm wanting to be really sensitive to ensuring that we're communicating broadly, the issues, the wants, and the needs.
So if we were to go down this path, David, how do you see it being coordinated and organized? I mean, these are steps, but for them to happen,
Well,
somebody has to take charge.
Yeah, I think that also, I don't think you want to also be perceived as, either making this short and abrupt or long and arduous either. So I would envision that we would set some parameters around, when these would happen. I would likely charge someone to help organize and pull together a panel, perhaps, having some board participation in that around setting up some criteria around how we select a panel, how we would organize a debate if that was the case. And again, most importantly, as you, the board, would be able to be present and listen and observe these conversations to help you garner a decision.
I feel like we've gotten an awful lot of feedback over the past few weeks, and I feel like this could go on, and yet I think we need to come to some kind of closure one way or another. I think it's important for us to hear from Mr. Burke and maybe Ed, on behalf of the students. And I think, I'm not sure the panel is the way to go, to be honest with you, David. I see what you're saying with that, but I just think to belabor it longer is maybe a mistake.
Yeah, I probably agree with that as well. In that, at our last meeting, I thought we had many very eloquent speakers talking on both sides of the issues. And since that time, we've had quite a few emails discussing both sides of the issues as well. And I think the sides are pretty well fleshed out. I think I have a good understanding of at least what the different perspectives of the community are. What still is missing, well, I shouldn't say it's entirely missing, because we've heard from a lot of students as well. But I like the idea of having some student involvement, be it a debate, a discussion, to hear more directly from the student after a deliberative process that's happened at the student level, after they've really thought this through and really understood the sides of the issue. So I think that idea is definitely good. I don't know how much more a panel discussion would add as far as our understanding of the sides of this particular issue.
I think from my perspective, I know I'd be interested in hearing from high school administration. And I think at the same time, that has been a voice that hasn't been as present at our meetings, would be to ask high school administration to bring in some form or fashion the deliberations from a student discussion. And not just individual feedback necessarily, but some deliberate, and I think they're best suited to figure out how to do that. When you look at the panel discussion, I'm not opposed to that idea. I think a panel discussion, however, could include all of the other perspectives that you're talking about here, including schools that have changed their name in the past, students, and other perspectives that you might want to add. So if the panel option is the way the board decided to go next, I would say you can include a lot of those interested parties in it. But in terms of how I would prioritize things, I think the high school administration with the charge of bringing some student voice that reflects deliberation, not a referendum or not kind of a popular vote, but really the results of differing perspectives.
And then would you follow those up with that being kind of the first object, and then the others with kind of the panel combined? Was that?
I don't know, I think that's the
Okay.
board. I mean, it
Wasn't
sounds
sure.
like there wasn't a lot of interest in adding a panel. I don't know. Patrick or Dan, do you want to weigh in on that?
Well, I think that the hearing from the high school administration needs to be, is the number one missing thing that I feel right now. And I think it's appropriate for them to find a way to develop a student opinion on that or input on that. Not quite sure what the right word is there. I would feel a lot more comfortable coming to some decision on this if we had a fairly strong recommendation from the stakeholders, if you will, the people who are going to live with, implement whatever's going to happen in the future. Panel discussion, having those participants in it might be a way in which those things could all get represented and just summarized. But I would really like to find a way in which there's a strong recommendation brought to the board, not leaving the board with, the problem to resolve in and of ourselves, okay?
So I would agree that with Martin's point. I think we've heard a lot of the points at this point. I'm not sure a panel discussion would bring any new conversation. Obviously, it has that potential, but my gut is that we've heard most of the concerns on both sides of this one. So I would not be in favor of us moving forward with the panel. I do agree that the administration in some way engaging with the student body to bring information in on that perspective. I'm not sure I'd want a recommendation from them as much as their perspective on the two options of either keeping the Rebel name or moving to a new name. Moving on to the other area high schools, the only concern that I would have on reaching out to other area high schools, if we were to take that step, is to make sure that we balance that. I think we could easily come up with a list of high schools that have tackled this and chosen the same direction to change the name. I'm not sure we could come up with a list of that have chosen the others. So I'm not sure that would be a two-sided set of data that we'd receive back. That's my concern on that one.
Any additional thoughts? Julie, you mentioned the time frame, and I do think the board's received a lot of feedback. I also think that we owe it to all the stakeholders and the district to kind of take the time that it's going to take, and I don't think we know how much time that is going to take. I agree with you, it shouldn't go on indefinitely, but if there's gaps in our information that we want to fill out, I don't think it's a disservice to anybody to seek that out, so. Any additional comments, Martin? So am I hearing, I don't think we need to take a vote necessarily on this, but am I hearing that we would want to charge David with getting the high school administration to bring their recommendations and specifically to bring some student deliberations to our next meeting?
I think that makes good sense, yeah.
And as far as you had made a recommendation, David, on having a goal statement. What are your thoughts there
Well,
specifically?
I think, that would work appropriately with the high school administration, kind of framing what you just said. We would like your feedback, both as an administrator, but also the student voice, So giving some sort of a directive to them on what that would be. But that wouldn't be only inclusive of them, and maybe others. How would others then weigh in on that same response? So again, I think the goal statement or the question that you're looking to affirm is an important one, so that you're not all over the place. So that was kind of my recommendation, to kind of pull this in, into some additional clarity.
So is there any additional feedback we would want to direct David to seek out beyond the high school administration with some specificity around the results of a student deliberation from a board perspective? And this kind of gets to your question, Julie, of are we thinking about other stakeholders in the discussion that we'd want to seek out? So why don't the board take a moment to reflect, and I'll just turn to the community. If there's any additional input that any community members would like to make, I'll entertain comments from the public. Yes, over here. Could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm John Ferguson. I'm a mother of a child at the middle school and here at the high school.
Thank you.
Are we going to seek something from the middle school administration, since they've sort of inherited the high school mascot name too?
I think that's what we were just talking about, of asking the high school administration to offer their thoughts and ideas going forward.
And the middle school?
Oh, the middle school, I'm sorry. Will you include all administration?
I'm one of the parents who has cultural concerns about the rebel name. I think it's offensive. And I think that I don't like to have that present for the children starting so young as well. So I think I'd be interested to have the middle school input.
So feedback at the middle school level,
Not from the students, but the
From the
administrator's
administration.
perspective.
and we can certainly include the principal or assistant principal.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Bob Walsh. I'm pleased to hear that you want to pursue this further. Well, I'm concerned, one, I disagree with the idea of having a public panel. I think we've had enough back and forth, quite frankly, and I'll address that a little bit further in a moment. But I'm a little concerned about the student input, because I think it was going to need to take some careful preliminary discussion or instruction on racism, on the history of the Confederacy, and on the current events as to what's going on. And I'm not sure, based on my teaching of African American history at the school here, that knowledge is generally understood with the student body. I found that my students in African American history, which was an elective, would say the most common comment they would say is, "Why haven't we learned all this stuff in U.S. history?" Now, the simple answer is it's not taught. It's not in their textbooks. So that concerns me a little bit, because when the kids would take this course, their attitudes changed. And I'm sorry to say, I have to sit here and think about getting up on Saturday morning and reading the sports page about the Rebels' performance in the football, or the students' performance in the football game last week, which shocked me a little bit. And so that concerns me a little bit. I agree with Julie. I think that, and with you, Madam Chairman, I think this needs to be brought to a fairly rapid conclusion, because this issue has become quite ugly. Since the last meeting, I've learned a lot about South Burlington and a lot about the school. I talked to an administrator from one of the schools here, and learned that he's done some research on it about the connection with the Confederacy. And it's not something that happened in the past, it's still going on. There are artifacts within his office and within the school with the Confederate flag, Confederate soldiers, right today. Well, I can say the Confederate soldier today. On the flag, I'm not sure. That was presented about 10, 15 years ago. So I'm concerned about this whole thing, and I would like to have it brought to a conclusion. It has a, excuse me, I don't have it on silent. It can go on forever, and that is also a fear of mine, that it'll just be committees and committees and nothing will get done. And of course, you're charged as the elected policy-making board to make that decision. Not the students, not the public, not the general hysteria, but that's your responsibility. And I'm very pleased with the way you're approaching it. So I think that I would like to see those things done and this brought forward. I mean, I was shocked when this administrator told me today about, when I talked to you last week, or the last meeting, I said the elephant in the room is racism and we don't talk about it. I think that was my closing statement. And I learned today from this administrator that within the last 2 years, you had a racial epitaph put out on the track. Run, nigger, run. Painted on the track. He happened to stumble on it. So it was quickly removed, and whoever he reported it to took immediate action. But that's why I'm concerned about attitudes within the school. They have to understand what we're talking about. This isn't about a football schedule or achievements on the athletic field. This is about the perpetuation of a name that is strongly connected to the racial policies of the Confederacy. And I really hope that you'll come to this decision quickly. And if you make a decision to keep the name, then we should have a committee, you should do whatever you have to do to see how to take it. I would hope you'd come to the decision to get rid of the name and set up another committee to determine how it's going to be implemented. Now, everybody's talking about, well, we're going to have rockets, or we're going to be this, that. Who cares? You already got a nice SB, and so be it. I've had numerous conversations with people saying we can't afford to change the name because we'll have to change the colors of the school and we'll have to do this and that, what have you. That's all immaterial. It's a basic thing. Do we want to perpetuate the image of this school of supporting that association with the Confederacy? That's what I think. So thank you for hearing me out now. And I won't bore you again with this stuff.
I say one thing. I heard today that the girl that actually started this and her son were verbally abused at the football game last week. That's right. And that's probably the reason she's not here.
That came from the administrator.
Any other comments? Any additional board
Yeah.
comments? I'm sorry.
May I make a comment
Yes.
on the mascot issue? Thank you. My name is Alex McHenry. I have kids in the elementary school. They'll be in high school in about 5 or 6 years. I think it's interesting that on either side of the issue, the Confederacy gets brought up no matter what. And I also think it's telling that not a single person that I know of color has come forward and say, let's keep the rebel. Nobody that I know of has. And I think you'd be hard-pressed to, one, get somebody who will, and not lose a friend at the same time. As a room full of nearly all white people, we have the privilege of knowing that this mascot does not pertain to our history. As white people, we have a privilege of knowing that a rebel was never anybody who tried to keep our ancestors enslaved. It never happened to us. But I think as a community, we need to have a sense of empathy for people who do not have the European American, or whatever you want to call it, history, and have a much different history. And sometimes have to confront their own history on a daily basis, and have to confront offensive things on a daily basis in our society. And I must say that having a mascot as a rebel is a very minor thing, but it is a slight. And if we want our school to be inclusive and welcoming, and make it a constructive experience for everybody in it, we must have the sense of empathy and the ability to put ourselves in another person's point of view and realize that something that may not seem immediately harmful to us or someone who looks like me, but may be very harmful to somebody else. And that's why I think this mascot should be, the rebel should be dropped. We should get something else. And I was also thinking, there's a good analogy for it this week. In high school, I read Romeo and Juliet. Anybody else read it in high school? Anybody else? Most of us? There was a great line that I think Juliet said it. A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. And I think that applies to South Burlington. We don't have to call ourselves the rebels, but we would be just as sweet. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? So unless there's any other comments from the board, I think there was consensus that the next steps would be to ask David to ask the high school administration to offer their thoughts and ideas going forward, and to include in that some deliberation by students relative to, and what that process would look like. Hopefully that could occur before the next meeting, but I'll leave that up to our
I
superintendent.
think, given the comment we had, we should also include the middle school.
And include in middle school administration. Yeah. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, and I would add, just from Mr. Walsh's comments, that and the administration should be treating this as an opportunity to educate as well, not just, take a straw poll on this. There should be deeper understanding of some issues underlying this before, or as part of the deliberation of the high school students and middle school.
You good with that, David? All right, thank you. Thank you for the comments. All right, we'll move on to agenda item 8.
I think David finished with the
Oh,
report.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you,
I
Dan.
think, yeah, we've got, it's on the same report, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So moving on to 8, is that what?
Yes,
Yeah, sorry.
sorry.
Yeah.
Moving on to 8.
So with regard to the 4th grade situation at Rick Marcotte, as I informed the board last meeting, the increased numbers of students from what we predicted at budget time to summertime to then opening of school changed significantly. And as a result of having just 3 classroom teachers, it obviously compounded itself quite significantly, representing student class sizes of 25, 26, and 26. And so after soliciting feedback from the teachers and Mr. Kuhn, I came forward with a recommendation to add a teacher to you last week. You asked me to come back with, if the board did approve, what would that timeline look like, or what would be the next steps? Also, if we were not, if you were not to approve, what that would look like. So what I provided you is just some recommendations. Obviously, I've worked with Mr. Kuhn around the timeline, if the board were to approve tonight, that Mr. Kuhn would be sending out a letter tomorrow or Friday informing them that an additional teacher has been added, and outlining the process by which we would be going about to establish classrooms, the makeup of that classroom configuration, looking at equity, the best that we can, first looking at volunteers, but also being clear that if we get no volunteers, then the administrator, in this case, is going to need to make a recommendation to form, what we would say a balanced classroom. Feedback would be sought from those teachers that made placement last year, so the outgoing third grade classroom teachers coupled with the current fourth grade teachers. So that would be if the board would be to move forward. If not, obviously we have worked, and those teachers are working hard to support the students. We would continue to look at ways in which we would continue to support those students in the classroom, in those classrooms currently. Obviously, my recommendation to you would be to approve that. This is in part and play connected to the conversation that we're going to have in a little bit around the master planning and visioning, specific to the distribution of staff when fluctuations occur at our elementary schools like this. So let me stop and answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, I have two questions. First of all, are there any other options other than status quo or add a teacher that have been considered?
Dan, there's always other options that we've considered. Those options, are ones that are not what I would say at this time educationally sound. The instruction methodology in the classroom is most important. The relationships in and amongst the classroom learning environment is most important. We work really hard to provide, instructions that is universally presented, so we don't have small pockets of pullouts. That's obviously an option, but you still have to have staff then to do it. You have to have direction from the classroom teacher. So we've looked at some of those other options. We've talked about, could we create a multi-age? That again creates disruption based on the numbers. So that gets difficult as well. The reason that we stuck to this as we went into the budget year, we felt that this was going to be a doable number. And typically, on our trend data, it looked like we were not going to get any additionals. If anything, it was going to go down a little bit. That did not happen. So very difficult, I think, at this point in time, even from the summertime, once class placements are made, to try to do something that's totally educationally sound, from my perspective, without that inclusion of the classroom teacher.
Okay. My second question is, I think we just need to go through this for clarity on this. The solutions are bounded by the physical dimensions of Marquette School. We have another school that has a fourth grade with very low student counts. I think we need to understand why it is that we can't consider that school as part of the solution.
Well, I think going forward, I think you can. Right now, we have, this district, as you know, has delineated boundaries of our schools, and when somebody registers, we say, where do you live? If they live within the Chamberlain or Orchard School, under No Child Left Behind, they have choice. And we have not had the other way around. We obviously have huge concerns about the regulations that were put on us by No Child Left Behind. And I don't think that's necessarily conducive to the learning community when there's selections like that. Transportation becomes a major concern around getting a student to another part of our community. And I think there's a whole host of things that red flags come up when you start to do that. Again, not recommended. That does not mean that it can't happen, but not recommended is, from my perspective, is educationally sound.
So if this is approved, David, what happens with the support staff that was already added to this grade and this class?
Yep, so again, we'll have that discussion with Mr. Kuhn. Sometimes just taking that person immediately out. We also have some other areas that we're watching right now on enrollment. But we'll have that conversation around when that could diminish. There's also, I think, you be careful, we have relationships that have been formed, so if this is coming on in October, this position, there may be some transitional things that might need to happen that we're looking at. So I don't want to say absolutely have a drop dead date of reducing that. Certainly, I'd like to see that get reduced. That was the kind of the out of the gate resolve that I thought would help when numbers were lower than they are now. So we look at that.
The one question I have, and I'll put my parent hat back on, is, if this were to be approved and going forward from a logistics standpoint, if my child was being asked to shift into a new situation, how will that process be managed in terms of with families and with students and with staff?
Again, I think, Mr. Kuhn will outline a little bit more of that. I mean, I think an important piece is that, they go from 3 classrooms to 4, but they share a lot of commonality amongst one another, and that would, I've asked him, and he's actually come up with some ideas on how to ensure that cohesiveness can stay there. Again, I think to your point is, if I'm now not in your class and we've had a relationship, a connection, how can we continue to stay connected? And so I don't want to present that as a perfect resolve, but he's working to make sure that those shared times, whether it's first thing in the morning or common meeting time or things like that, could still be fostered, fostering that relationship. So I have seen a draft of his letter. I have a few, minor suggestions, but he has put together, some thoughts on what that would look like.
Any other questions or comments? Anything from the public?
Yeah, I have a question. Hi, my name's Scott Baker. I have a son in Central School and 2 more on the way. I'm also an administrator at a local college, so I understand sort of the fluctuations with enrollment, and it's not always easy to predict precisely with enrollment. But I was wondering if you could just educate us a little bit on the enrollment process and why it might be difficult to know at a certain point what enrollment's going to be and how it fluctuates so close to the start of the school year or even after the start of the school year. Thank you.
So typically, we don't get fluctuations
Fourth grade.
significantly up in the upper grades. We're pretty assured of those numbers. Yes, we have some that move in, but we also have some folks that move away as a result of kind of our community and our business partners' occurrences. Where we see the most fluctuation and the highest variability, at least of what the board has had to deal with, has been at the kindergarten level. And we typically have, information from live births and information around how our student kindergarten, and we have kindergarten registration, but not everybody does it at the same time, or we'll do it in a way that will inform our staffing. So typically, that's the one, and we've typically, as you know, put some buffers in there around contingency teacher. Again, this is not ideal because, we're really conscious around the sensitivity of how relationships are formed and, kids really become connected to one another in their classroom. So this is not the ideal time, but that being said, we also want to be extremely cognizant of the instruction and the delivery of the education where that can happen appropriately. And when we reach numbers, particularly in square footage spaces that were designed, significantly hamper that opportunity when transitions and staffing, within that room really pose a significant issue. And both at Chamberlain and Rick Marcotte, our class sizes are not, in square footage, are not big. Even though we have, we've definitely been cognizant of our upper limits. We probably need to reevaluate that a little bit based on our current square footage sometimes, because, when you add, on 800 square feet, and you add in the equipment and the desks and things, it begins to provide you a very clear picture of the space in which, 26 bodies with, 4 adults in there, what that looks like, pretty small.
I think, David, too, you mentioned specific to the gentleman's question, there were some movements between neighborhoods of the students. I think there was a total of about 9 or 10
Right.
students that ended up coming into the 4th grade. And there was movement between neighborhoods. There were people new to South Burlington, and they were not enrolling at the same time. So there was kind of one earlier on in the summer and one a little bit later. And then by the time the classrooms were developed and school was starting, there was an aggregate, I think 9 new
Yeah.
students. And that is unusual. In my 10 years on the board, the most fluctuation we've seen has been at the kindergarten level with new families. And seeing this level at the 4th grade is very unusual.
Certainly, I acknowledge Dan's point around enrollment numbers in other schools, and in the other schools are smaller, and I recognize that, but until we make, and redrawing those lines, as you know, some of you have been in the community long enough, when you redraw the lines, as we did in 1998, that adds a whole nother level of questions and anxiety as well. Again, this is not opportune. I'm not sitting here saying I'm happy about, coming to you and adding. This is not in the best interest of kids. I mean, this is not an easy thing to do, whether you're dealing with a large classroom or you're going to add a new classroom teacher. So I wish I could have avoided this and planned better, but this occurred.
And I think it further puts a spotlight on the board's challenge around master planning and visioning, where we know that having some scale to work with does help accommodate some of these shifts over time. But regardless of that, I think the critical issue here is that this is not an ideal situation for this particular set of 4th graders. So are you looking for a motion at this point?
Yeah, I would like that, and would like to know, affirmatively how I'm going to move forward.
Well, let me go ahead. I'll move that we approve the addition of a 4th grade teacher at Rick Marcotte Central School.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That
Thank
is a
you.
unanimous approval.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask you a question just before you move on? Just to be clear, historically, for the last many number of years, I know the Chamberlain numbers have been quite low. And I know that they're right versus the central numbers. There's been
For total enrollment?
well, for whatever the classroom size or whatever the issue was, because you just got to saying that the Chamberlain numbers were considerably lower. Students could have gone there, but it's late to do something like that.
In certain grades,
understandably.
there is capacity. And other grades, because of the smallness of the school, when again you take, you take an n number and you divide it by 2, it's far different than dividing by 3. So we have some areas at all of our schools that are, some grades that were in this kind of watch place. It's not necessarily consistent, however, between 2nd grade at Orchard to 2nd grade at Chamberlain to 2nd grade at Rick Marcotte. And that, in and of itself, lies the complexity of the problem.
But David, isn't it true that the available population
Could be.
in the Chamberlain district has gone down for 2 major reasons? One, the relocation, the demise of a lot of real estate in that area. There's a number of homes that have been sold off, and secondly, because of the requirements of the No Child Left Behind Act and the opportunity for people to have the option, if they were at Chamberlain or Orchard, to move to Marcotte, that's ended in a migration of students in that area.
Yes.
And then perhaps a third thing, which isn't a decline over there, but it is the southeast quadrant of South Burlington that's experiencing the growth in students, and that happens to be a Marcotte area. So those 3 factors are upsetting the balance that we had maybe 5 years ago. And if I'm wrong, please correct me.
I think that's accurate, Dan. Oh, I'm sorry? Yes.
So I'm Abby Crocker. So my son is actually in the 4th grade that's going to be impacted by this. And so, I'm so happy that we have a new teacher, but oh, now my son has to go through this. And so I'm really disappointed about the timing of this. I wonder, some of the things you just mentioned about the anticipation of the fluctuation in the numbers, those were knowns. I just want to sort of express some frustration that it didn't happen over the summer, because I haven't actually ever heard of anybody changing classes into the school year. Does this happen a lot, that this is when it happens? I get it that nobody's happy that it's happening now and wishes that it happened in the summer, but I can't help but feel like we sort of dropped the ball. And these were known fluctuations, and I also sort of feel like, wow, it really leads well into the argument to consolidate at this point. And I'm really sort of concerned to see that, with this class being held as an example. And I think that, adding a fourth teacher is a lot less expensive than, oh, let's fix the problem of, fluctuating enrollments by closing all our schools and building a $100 million facility. This teacher is a lot more affordable than that. And I just want us to keep that in mind, and also think, we just said, oh, population's declining. Our demographer said population's declining. Here's an example where it increased so much that we were caught off guard, and now we have to do this. So I feel like maybe we can be more mindful of this moving forward.
I think we should understand that the population is going down in total. It's the distribution among the districts.
So we could redistrict.
Yes, but we want to do that every year.
I think we could better delineate.
Yeah, Abby, I don't think we did know this particular fluctuation. I think there were some general trends that Dan talked about, but we had information, one, that the No Child Left Behind was not going to affect the schools this year, and that changed at the last minute. And then the 9 additional students we're talking about was not predictable and came in such a manner that I know, having participated in those conversations many times, I've never heard of that fluctuation at any other level except kindergarten. So it was unpredictable in that sense, although Dan mentioned some general trends. So I think you bring up good points, and I've also never seen it happen in the middle of the year, or not middle, but after the school year has started.
Very rarely.
Is the gentleman in the back?
Yeah, thank you. Last year, my name's Todd Hart. Last year, the class size for 3rd grade were fairly large to begin with. And now we're seeing an increase into 4th grade. And I'm just wondering what kind of go-backs and or lessons learned, where are we looking? Because 5th grade's coming, right? In about 6 months, or 5 months, or whatever. It just seems like it gets here quicker every time. Knowing what we know now, is this teacher that we're bringing in, is this someone that's going to transition with the grades, or is there some expectation that we're going to have to come back and revisit this subject for our 5th grade? And I'd like to know if there's some questions there.
So I think allocating resources, I first want to say that, this particular grade has been on the radar. And it's been definitely in a range that has been watched, because it's been a larger group of kids. And we have those trends that happen all the way through our high school. We have trend data that has fluctuation in our student numbers, even when they're consolidated into one of our single schools, the high school or the middle school. So in planning forward, it is to look at that data, and I think we put a little bit more of a question mark on these fluctuations that are here. And again, as brought up before, these known fluctuations, a lot of them weren't known, but we'll put a little bit more of a buffer, particularly for this group of students, because we don't want to have this group be negatively, affected by a larger class size. So we'll be watching it. Again, but I don't want to sit here and say the same configuration will be there if we have 15 less students next year, or something like that.
Agree.
So again, that's a little bit of that planning and forecasting, and we're struggling with that a little bit. And I think Mr. Fleming indicated some of the variability that's happening. Those of you who've been following the master planning and visioning and some of that demographic changes, the airport, et cetera, have certainly seen some of that. And so we're in kind of uncharted territory at the moment, but yet we have to do it right for kids. So I get it, and I appreciate the comment.
Yeah, and just a quick follow-up. So we've seen this now for about 2-3 years, especially with this group of,
Mhm.
as we're talking about. So as you target a potential teacher to bring in, are you looking for someone who potentially could slide into a 5th grade role? Or are we specifically looking 4th grade only?
Yeah, so we're, just so you know, anybody who comes in based on our teacher contract comes in after July 15th as a 1-year contract.
Okay.
With the idea, obviously, that if the need exists, then it gets reposted, and we, again, it's really about looking for the best candidate. Now, obviously, if we make a decision now, which the board has just approved, we're gonna look for the best candidate, and we hope we hit it right on. So in effect, if we need to keep, we're gonna keep that teacher on and add that to the 5th grade, then that would be the person. But, so yes, we're looking for the best candidate always, but we have some things we have to pay attention to.
And do you have a target date for start?
Right now, again, I'm gonna work with Mr. Kuhn. We have some things we post, we do some interviews, we have some informing of parents, so we have you'll see a timeline that will be coming out from Mr. Kuhn, if not tomorrow, Friday.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks. Yes.
I'm Jennifer Bond, I have a son in 4th grade. To go along with what was just talked about, for 5th grade, what will make you decide? What is the number that you're looking for? We thought 23 in every class with this particular grade, and I know it's happened in years past. That's a pretty high number, and the teachers in 2nd and 3rd grade were concerned about that, and I think spoke with administration about that also. So what can you tell us for next year? If the number of students in each class decreases by 3, you're going to, or 2, you're going to put them in 3 classes and make the numbers 23 again, or what are you, I guess I want to know what you're looking for 5th grade, because I would like to know now versus next year.
I think safe to say if the numbers stay within this range right now, where we currently are, less even a couple students, we're gonna stay kind of in the status quo, would be the recommendation. Again, the recommendation is always contingent upon community approval. It's gotta be a budget, it's gotta be approved by the community. If it doesn't get approved, then we're gonna have to look at other areas, and I don't wanna say that it would be targeted to this particular grade or school, but, we need to be mindful of the budget, obviously, so it's really important that we put forth a budget that we think is appropriate, not just for Rick Marcotte, but certainly for all the other schools and configurations. So, I'm being a little bit vague here because, drawing on a specific, drop dead number puts me in that same bucket that if then over the summer I have a whole host of students that leave and another school that sees increases, it's that allocating of those resources in the most mindful way. So,
But we do have class size recommendations within our policy in terms of a minimum or a max as well as a target, which is substantially lower than the max, I believe.
yeah, it's in the kind of that optimal is net 15, 20 for this grade, and then it's 25 is that approaching that max. So, and it does vary according to grades. And again, we have some additional factors that apply, particularly in some of our smaller locations, smaller rooms too. So, again, I'm not feeling good about where we're at from the mindset of children. I think that it's been not an easy, and this won't be easy either. We're going to work to make it the best we possibly can with parental support and school support, but we recognize that this could have been done could have been done better. However, we don't have that crystal ball.
So I guess my last question is going in for the budget for next year. Is this teacher going to be added for the following year?
I would say if numbers don't change, the 5th grade would hold with the same number of classroom teachers would be what I would recommend to the school board for budget approval. Now, again, that gets more complicated because there's other schools, but for this particular grade, if numbers don't change, I would be hard pressed not to ask for the same allocation of teachers.
Yes.
My name is Tim Barrett. What sort of pressures does this new hire put on the budget for the remainder of the fiscal year?
Every additional staff, has an impact on the budget. And, this is in part and play where we're at as a community around how we pay for education. So this is an added expense that we did not anticipate. We did have some money allocated for contingency. So again, this is all part and play to you, the taxpayers, and to our community at large, that we absorb these increases. So it has an effect.
And we didn't bring this up specifically. I think it came up at our last meeting, and maybe I'm being a little presumptuous, but we did have some favorability in the budget resulting from some retirements. So given that this is a one-year contract and we had some favorability, I do believe, I don't want to put
Yep.
words in your mouth, David, but I think it's covered within the current budget. So it's really from a forward-looking planning standpoint that we'll really need to look at the head count. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 9.
I didn't put this in kind of the sequence, it appeared that way, but I think it's an important and fitting conversation to have. So, Stuart, can you?
Oh, did you, on your superintendent report?
Actually, under my report, the one area that I didn't, although the board knows of this announcement, I had on here that just acknowledgement of the hiring process that we're going to be working on to fill a very difficult shoes to fill of Mr. Stewart. Will be retiring in June from our business manager position. But I just wanted to let the board know that I'm working on a plan and we'll have some communication soon around what we're going to look at in that regard. Okay, so master planning and visioning. I'm a little bit worried about flooding you with information. And before I walk through a PowerPoint, which is an excerpt of the report. So let me just tell you what you have at your place. You have this, that really is the report that I'm proposing to you tonight. And this is the one that's most comprehensive. And what I've done is to try to call out some of the important points of this to share with you in the PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint feels longer just because it is in fact kind of in that readability, if you will. So,
So can I preface this a little bit for the public, David, that
absolutely.
In the past couple of board meetings, the board has really asked for David and his administrative team's recommendation based on the work that the master planning steering or task force did, but to kind of layer in what the administrative team's recommendation would be to the board as we consider and deliberate where we want to take, what recommendations we want to take back to the community. We also, it'd be remiss not to say we will be looking for additional community feedback at some point. But what we're planning to hear tonight is really David and his administrative team's recommendations based on all the work that's been done so far. And it's another important piece of information for the board to consider as we move forward.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So I do want to just start out with a preface that, this is a recommendation that's large. This is large. It's significant to South Burlington. I think this is the beginning of, soliciting additional feedback will be important. I'm extremely pleased with the feedback that we've had and the work that's been done between the council and the board and the task force. They put a significant amount of hours, and we've had a significant amount of feedback on that. That said, to your point, we still have a lot more to hear about this. I'm sure that I've missed some things here. I'm sure that, even the things that I've talked about to you folks, I may be absent of some of this. So there's a lot, I think, in this story that I want to present to you. So I want to walk you through this. And please, I think, stop me along the way and ask critical questions. I do want to also say to John Stewart, pulling the data together for me, along with Annette Harden, who also worked, hard with the master planning and visioning team, to my staff on doing this in addition to some of the other things, we have to do on a daily basis to try to pull this together. Particularly Delina and Meg always are critical folks to this happening. So let me walk you through this. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I'm going to put you. Yeah. So let me try to walk through, and I'll bulletize some of my points here, but I probably will try to talk a little bit more about some of these. So, obviously, some of the things that we're talking about, for those of you who don't know, although I think that probably people know this, that we are a district that's made up of 3 elementary schools, 1 middle and 1 high school. Safe to say that we've had some variability. Obviously, we just talked about this variability in our student enrollment, particularly at the 3 elementary schools. And we've been seeing some increased unpredictable student enrollment, particularly some of the effects around some of the No Child Left Behind Act, which has definitely had some effects on our student population as well as our staffing challenges. When we talk about these staffing challenges, it's exactly what we talked about earlier around the dispersion of a number of students and how we support them. And when they are indifferent in the 3 schools, it makes it difficult at times to staff in the most efficient and forecasted way. Also at the high school, we've had some increasing, and again, this is a volatility area, but we've had increasing numbers of students that have come to us. This is a positive from schools that do not have a high school. And we've seen, that result in some staffing fluctuations as well. District-wide, again, important to note that our enrollment has slightly decreased. And again, this is consistent with the Cropper report that was published in the master planning and visioning document that you can find online and looks like this, so be careful when you press print. But it is online on our webpage on a tab right on the main page. So as we see those student fluctuations occur, we've seen some things happen over time, and I think it's important to note some of the learning opportunities. At the elementary, we've seen, again, this is going back as far as 1999, when prior to that we had foreign language at the elementary, or what we call world language at the elementaries. We have seen art and music and physical education staffing levels fluctuate. When a class size or 2 drop out of a school, then we've reallocated that FTE. And when you reallocate the FTE, we have senior level teachers that then have rights to someone else's position. And so it creates someone, in some cases, needing to go between 2 schools, adds complexity to make that happen. We've also seen at the high school some of our more advanced programs eliminated. And again, if Mr. Manazar was here, you would hear about Latin. That is one example. But we've also seen some reductions in sections, particularly that have lower enrollment. But sometimes that's very difficult because those lower enrollment numbers are kids that are working towards the higher level. So when they get to a 4 level and that gets eliminated, they have to make a decision on where to go. Even though that number is small, that changes the opportunity. So we've seen those fluctuate as well. And then performing arts, again, we've had some reductions there as well. Let me just quickly pause around, these are student opportunities, and I think first and foremost, South Burlington is lucky, and we have, I think, done a good job in providing an excellent education by the opportunities that we provide. That said, when we look at some of these other factors, we're going to talk about the effects of opportunities migrating down, having to be reduced, and this is in part and play, I think, the work that we're trying to get at around the master plan. So that scheduling challenges with the FTEs is what I talked about earlier. When we make a reduction, when someone has rights, it can create somebody going between 2 or more locations, and that is problematic. A little bit of background, again, we talked about this earlier. In 1998, this district went through a redistricting process that drew hundreds of people. I was hearing about it from afar, but it drew hundreds of people that had all kinds of concerns and questions around the redefining of those boundaries. It was done as a result of overcrowding happening particularly at Orchard School, where we had a high influx of students in that particular district at that time, so it warranted the redistricting. Again, just a point of information. Currently, again, we have enrollment fluctuations in certain grades within the 3 elementary schools. Definitely that staffing allocation that I talked about before is prevalent. At the city, we've seen increased desired growth and development plan, particularly with the city center. 10 years ago, it was less talked about than it is today. It's far more talked about and desired plan to move forward. In addition, we've seen some activity particularly affecting our Chamberlain School around the noise level with jet traffic, particularly also affecting the voluntary home takeover program, which has seen, or will see soon, I think, about 100 less homes in that location. Again, this was also talked about earlier. Important to note that this is, the school board directed me to come up with a recommendation and reevaluate this. As a result, they charged me, they charged a committee to be formed along with the city council, and came up with, asked that a task force be formed to look into this. And so the task force began their work. And again, this is not great to see, so excuse me for that, but again, this is the charge that's there, basically to look at current configurations, look at future opportunities, and provide some feedback in the form of options back to the school board, which is again in that report that I held up earlier. I'm not going to read through that. The committee findings and recommendations, again, this is from the Master Planning Task Force, and the board heard on a series of occasions, up to including the final report, and I see Art is here who presented that report, came up with the two options. Option O, which called for Orchard School to become a K2, a new school to be a 3-5, Tuttle to remain as it is, a 6 through 8, and the high school 9 through 12. Behind that, obviously, there were some recommendations around some things that needed to be done. But again, just for clarity purposes, just letting you know what this option is. Option Q is one elementary school, a new K4. Middle school goes to a 5 through 8 by adding 5th grade to this location. The high school remains the same at 9 through 12. Also important in the report was a minority report, and I think important around the dialogue and discussion that happened, that there was, which is not unlike, we did not have complete agreement, and there was some concerns around how that was done. And so in brief, that they disagreed with the task force recommendation on the consolidation of K2 and 3-5 campuses, and really recommended moving forward with 2 elementary K4s, creating the 5-6 here at the middle school, and working towards elevating to 21st century level, the high school. So that was, again, I want to make that point as well. So as I now get into kind of my recommendation and thought that I came up with, so arriving at the recommendation that I am going to present to you tonight, you know, as Elizabeth alluded, I have been working diligently with administrators, because this obviously is not easy, because we have administrators that could likely see that their school wouldn't be there. And I think anyone who works in the building, certainly as an administrator, has a real sense of community and care, so it's not always easy to do that, but I have solicited their feedback. Certainly I've taken into account the entire report the task force put together, including the minority report. I've looked at the student opportunities to support our achievement, and again, I began looking at the number of opportunities that this district provides and wondering, you know, kind of what's happened over time. But I have to say, and I don't want to paint a negative picture, we've been a district that's been pretty consistent with providing really excellent opportunities for students. I want you to think about that as kind of just a flat line across the year group. I just want you to kind of visualize that opportunity line, if you will. Enrollment status, again, I looked at both current and future forecasts. Again, this is in part Cropper, and some of this has been corrected, you know, and looked at as a result of our more recent activity today. Budget implications to support the student opportunities. You're going to see some of that, as well as the ability of our community to pay. Historical view of our budget, current status of our bonded debt were some of the things that I considered. Status of our facility stewardship plan. For people who don't know that, that means how do you care for your building? What are you doing with boilers and roof replacement, air handlers, pavement, things of that nature. Those dollar items is what we call our stewardship plan. Staffing allocations and needs, how is that being dispersed? what does that look like into the future? Also taking into consideration, also the part of the charge was looking at the city center and their desire to enhance their spaces, our community of which we occupy. And then I'd say lastly, although this is where my caveat, I don't think this is really the last, there's a lot of other things, but certainly school safety and security measures. We've worked hard as a district to keep our schools safe. Our budget has supported good technology to keep our schools safe. However, there's always that lens that I'm looking through and making a recommendation as well. Let me pause. Any quick questions? Good. So this is a little bit of the visualization that I want the board just to think about. I want you to now, with every slide, I want you to think about that opportunities line that, we'll say is pretty flat across the way. As we add these slides, I want you to kind of build on those each, and I think that will help you understand a little bit about where I'm at with my decision. So looking at the number of students, K-8, again, we've seen some fluctuations. Again, this is K-8. This is the area that I'm most specifically talking about. I didn't put the whole K through 12 in here, although we know that K through 12 we have a slight decline. It gets more confusing because you pull in out of district students. But nonetheless, this is our line going on with our student enrollment currently. And if you were to draw that line, you certainly would see that. Again, starting here, which is the year we're in, and going forward, you can just see that, again, based on the Cropper analysis, is kind of where we're headed, that line going down. Looking at our budget, and again, I think important to note that the red line represents our estimated budget based on our historical future, our past. We've been a district, although we've had high years and low years, our average increase has been about 3.2% increase, which represents the red line here. Right here in 16, you start to see that there's a blue line that is added, and this represents, under Act 46, the spending cap limit that's currently in play, which for us, in our spending situation, will allow us to go up 1.72%. Those districts that are able to, we have some districts in the state that will be able to increase that significantly more, that are low spending districts. We're in the I would say the upper tier bracket, and we're able to spend about 1.72.
David, just to clarify that's 1.7% without an additional penalty?
That's correct.
So if it were higher than that, there might be like a double taxation effect?
That's correct, yes, exactly right. We could vote for a higher budget, but it would incur a penalty for every dollar.
Over the
right,
that limit. So again, I'm wanting you to just, now you've had the opportunities line going flat, you've seen enrollment going down, and you've seen this going up. I'm wanting you to kind of be thinking about, there's probably a point in time here that is a critical point. And that's, again, what I'm trying to provide you.
we did, Martin's in the state legislature, so he knows this cap or this limit is in effect for 2 years, 17 and 18, but it's based on increased spending overall of 2% going forward. So that's why the line continues to grow, because rather than assume that it's going to go back up to 3.25% every year, we've conservatively said 2% a year.
So again, as John said, we have the capped spending for the 2 years, and then we just did 2%, which we felt, again, some of this, everything forward is guesstimate, right? Okay. So this is just a chart of our history, and again, this is out of our budget book, so this should not be a surprise to folks. I know it's hard to read, but again, this just gives you some specifics around our average increase and our tax rate implication as a district. So again, this adds to kind of that understanding of both our spending and our taxation. Anything else you want to add to that, John? I mean, I want to...
No, we've had some years where taxes went down actually, but,
right.
And also, the bottom chart shows what we know at the time a budget is passed. And in the last 3 years in a row, the legislature has taken action to reduce the tax rate after you voted on it, before the legislature ended sessions. 1 or 2 years in the back, it actually went up. So we do the best we can with what we know, and then it changes based on other factors that happen later.
So this pulls in the stewardship, which is the total district, and our stewardship, remembers, are those expenses that we have around elevators and roofs and boilers and things of that nature. And the red line represents our 3 elementary schools. And while I would say that some of you may say, okay, this now is going down, I'd like you to think about this one as a cumulative effect from where we are today and where we're going along the way. Clearly at the high school, and the board knows this, in the middle school, we put some money into ADA compliance, which we're proud to do, but it's expensive. And we have some future needs around window replacements, which you've all been aware of. We've done one bank, and I hope everybody enjoys the look from Dorset Street, but we've done one bank, and we have the intention to do more of those. And again, that's factored in here in our really what we'll say our 3-year focus of the stewardship plan. After the 3-year focus, we have those things reoccurring, but it's likely that we'll have some additional surprises. I think, and you'll see in the next slide, we kind of give you some totals of what this represents. Again, this is the stewardship of the elementary, so it's the same red line that you saw on the previous slide, but it calls out a little bit of the numbers, specifically from 2016 to 19, the total dollars that we're looking at spending. Again, this is if no configuration change were to take place. And then 2020 to 25, we're in the amounts of this. So obviously you could combine those and see our total estimate.
There are 3 distinct peaks. Are they individual schools?
John, do you want to?
There are certain roofs. There's three categories of improvements. The parking lots at Orchard and Chamberlain, Orchard being the most in need, and Chamberlain second. Marcotte's already been fixed, so that's not on there. There are a number of roofs, and the boiler at Chamberlain is in there, so that's why it peaks.
So here again, bringing you back to kind of the visualization of the slides that I've shared to date: enrollment, increase in budget, cumulative effect of stewardship plans specific to the elementary schools. I want you to just keep that in mind.
David,
Go ahead.
Quick question. Do you have operating expenses, not the one-off stewardship projects, but do you have annual operating expenses for each of the facilities?
So we do. I don't show them in here broken down that way. You'll see some cumulative amounts here in just a bit. But let me, again, these are probably areas that you're going to want some more information on. And let me continue and see if I can answer some of that. So another area, again, visualization of where we are. This is our bonded debt. So those of you who've been around, you know that we go out for a bond, and we did back in 1995 when we put on additions to the elementary schools to add additional learning spaces and make upgrades, and we did that. And so that was a bond. We also have a bond that we've repurposed. So this is just simply saying that our current outstanding bonded debt, and you see what's happening as we go out in our years. We're concluding those bond repayments, and so you can see where we're at with that. So again, another important visualization of the kind of activity going on in the district that I'm trying to highlight for you. This is really hard to see. It's easier in your report. And again, what we've tried to do here is just some key staffing needs. So I'll walk you through this for those people who you definitely can't see it. This is specific to elementary. This is showing 2016 to 3 schools, and then 2021 elementary school, which is again which is not again, which is what I am proposing, one elementary school. And so it simply,
And the one elementary school is K4,
right.
and the 3 is obviously K5.
So my recommendation, although I spell this out in the next few slides, my recommendation is a single K4 elementary with 5th grade moving here. That said, we have gone through, and I don't, these are not easy things to do around allocating of resources. So what I'm walking you through here is, again, what's the change from what we have now in total to what we would need if we were consolidated one. And right down here, I have basically the numbers associated with if we were to just do that transfer. In addition, though, part of the proposal around those opportunities is to bring back some of the things that I think are important to the learning opportunities for students, and I'm going to highlight just a couple of those. I feel it's really important that we bring back world languages to the elementary students, our K4 population. I think we would be well served by that, and it's a natural building block, systemic program that allows for what we have currently in the middle and the high school that is appropriate and developmentally called for, really, in the development of a foreign language. So what I add here is this would be the additions of some additions of 2 FTEs to world language. So you get to see the total number needed to make that happen.
That's mislabeled, it says 5th grade, it should be K4.
Oh, K4, yeah.
Yeah.
No, the prior page.
So we're on the elementary one, Abby? So that's where the ad comes in.
You said 2, David, though. This is a half?
The prior page.
No, the prior page.
So this is the key staffing needs at the elementary, and I know, I'm sorry that they look so identical, Elizabeth, but,
Yeah, sorry.
yep. So then looking at, obviously, if you see that there's a reduction here, but obviously in part the reduction is because 5th grade isn't in the elementary. It now has to be transferred to the middle school. So the next slide represents the middle school moving the 5th grade to Fred Tuttle. Again, everything here, again, pulls over the needs that we would have for accommodating the students. In addition, however, I put on here some additions to accommodate 5th grade over here. And in part and play, I really want to emphasize that I want the 5th grade students to participate in the language programs that we have here, obviously. I'd also like to see them have the opportunity to work into our visual and performing arts arena as well. And so this addition, again, the desire of this addition here is to help with the added world language, and I do think we can absorb the visual and performing arts into the program. Let me pause.
So am I reading this, that the net at this level is about 1 position?
That's correct. So again, part of this is, you know, the transference and also continuing or slightly enhancing the opportunities that I think are important to our district moving forward. So in the report, in both the whole report as well as in this, I made some links here to what we would call, and is an overused phrase, of 21st century learning. I don't want to say it's a wrong phrase, but it's overused, and people are often like, what does that really mean? So I've included some other information in here. Dor Whittier supplied, kind of giving you some imagery of what that 21st learning space looks like, as well as there's some small YouTube clips that you can go on and look at as well. And I pulled this one slide just to provide a quick conversation, because I think this is important too, around what we're trying to ensure we stay in. And I don't want anyone to think that we're in this place. We're really working hard to remain in this place, but the configurations and spaces and allocation of resources are an important part of that. And as you look at that, around, learning centered. Obviously, when you have class sizes that, that don't allow that, or you deal with some of the things that we've been dealing with this evening, that makes it difficult to keep some of these things in check. So from effective and authentic learning, learners constructing their own knowledge, looking at project learning for all as opposed to just learning for those that are only able to do that, cooperative learning, student discovery, etc. So this is just a quick attempt to give a little bit of clarity to the phraseology that often is used around 21st century. But I would certainly welcome folks to go on this, and I'll make this available on our website so people can look at this, look at these clips. So my recommendation, as I said earlier, I'm looking at option Q, which is to build a new elementary school that would serve pre-K to 4, with a middle school, Frederick H. Tuttle, serving 5-8. An addition would be needed to accommodate 5th grade here and rectify some of the identified shortfalls, specifically with the gym space, as you know, has been an identified area of need. At the high school, also, I would recommend that that the identified areas of need be worked out as well in this plan. Gym space, cafeteria space, and I didn't necessarily put these in the right order, but cafeteria space and other identified areas of need that were identified in both the NEASC as well as the Master Planning and Visioning document. So part of this is, and this gets difficult because any of these timelines, obviously, you could poke at quite significantly because it's so contingent upon your desires and wants, community feedback, etc. But I'm trying to provide you with some thoughts on next steps. So what I'm calling phase 1 would be currently from now through December, that we would work with what I think would be important, a real estate investment advisor, to validate the attached assumptions and assist us and advise us on other professional recommendations and options. I don't want you to think that I've uncovered every possible option, nor the task force. There may be other ideas about how we allow this to be achieved in the most cost-effective way that we would, I think, benefit from. I do think that it's important, and it was also referenced in the Master Planning Visioning document, that we go out and ensure that we have additional community feedback. I'm naming this community survey, although it doesn't have to be only a community survey, but I think that would be important. And I think it would be really important to solicit some of the feedback, additional feedback that we, at our community meeting, said we wanted and were unable to do. So that would be another step. Again, work with a real estate investment advisor. That's kind of my buzzword, but there's probably other words that you could use here, but someone to professionally advise us and to assist us with other options. Some of these options, again, some of the options could include the following. So writing a memorandum of understanding with the city that could include, but not limited to, the city's desire and need of the Rick Marcotte Central School and the associated cost benchmarks. Looking at city's desire and need to acquire the Orchard and the Chamberlain schools, if, again, interest is there. Land acquisition from the city for the school district. Again, we have identified school property currently by the city, but again, this would be part of the conversation. My recommendation would be that in this MOU is to look at that land acquisition to support one elementary school. Look at funding options that might include the district receiving the % of a local option tax on the properties that are sold, or city local option tax as a whole in the city to help equal an effective funding formula that helps us achieve what we're trying to do with building one elementary school and the cost incurred, also associated with the middle school and the high school. Also looking at a percentage of the sale of any of the school properties. So again, that would be part of an MOU that may be considered as well, that if a property is sold, then a percentage that would make this equation work would be back to the school district. In addition to these ideas, also outright go with a request for proposal to elicit developer interest in Rick Marcotte, Orchard, and Chamberlain. I do think it's important to also look at the review of the architectural estimates based on currently what was provided in the master planning and visioning document. We do have figures that are attached to that, but I can't with high level of certainty say that those are affirmed estimates, and I think that would be an important part to also garner additional information in. Phase 2, again, work with an advisor to assess forecasted financials, assess viable options to address the needs at the high school based, again, on the NEAS pieces that were identified. Really what I'm referring to here is that forecasted, if the city is successful with the acquisition by you of Rick Marcotte and the approval of the voters, then what would be that forecasted expectation of benefit? If City Center starts to develop, businesses prosper, I think there's a high level forecast of incoming revenue that would be significant. What would that look like? How can we utilize those forecasted financials to help inform the decision and communicate that to the public? Again, part of that, I think, is a really important piece for us to understand. And then I would propose, a vote somewhere in that March to August timeframe of 2016. Again, I think these are all dates that are fungible and probably have a need for further conversation. Again, I've worked hard at looking at these and acquired information from, architects in the master planning process about what some of these design phases, et cetera, take. So again, that would be a recommendation. And phase 3, we're actually continuing here on to phase 3. If the vote passes, begin that pre-construction phase. Again, this is what I just said, the design build and the time frame that it generally would take. And then begin construction in September of 17 through July of 19 with the goal to be in the new school by August 1st. Some of the benefits of this, I believe, when we get into other transitions and other options, we get into all kinds of other expenses around what are we going to do in the meantime. This plan, I believe, would allow school to continue. Perhaps construction would be able to begin on this site without disruption, significant disruption to students. It would allow for what I would envision a much smoother transition than any other option that's there. So, in summary, and again, I don't think I've hit all of these points necessarily, even that I've touched upon, but I believe the proposal to be one that will best serve the district for many years to come. Similar decisions were made at a time, I think, when there was a lot less available information 52 years ago, when the South Burlington community chose to build its own high school. I think there was a fair amount of risk that went on at that point in time, but there was some real foresight, and I think it has served us well. So I believe this proposal will be sensitive to our student needs, and will enable some returned opportunities that, although I would say are minuscule but important, such as our world language program. It would welcome our 5th graders into an environment that I think would appropriately balance our 5th, 6th team and our 7th and 8th team here, and that we would certainly be able to, I think, create an environment that would serve them extremely well. I think the overall safety issue, again, we continue to be, I think, a district that is very mindful of student safety, but the construction of a new school is far different. And I use this one simple example. Most of our schools and our windows start at, all of them, our exterior areas are about 3 feet high. That's not the way you would construct a new building today. They all start about 5 or 5.5 feet off the ground. There's logic behind that around safety and security as a result of intruders that are trying to do harm to our children. There's entrances and egress that are critically important. People don't come in and come right into your front door. There's winding driveways that allow for safety, to be considered as people come into our properties and can be asked some questions before they get too close to our schools. Again, we're we're trying to be really mindful, but again, I think that some of this would allow for, again, an eye on safety. I think so new construction, small learning communities, that is definitely a concern. If you build one, you're talking about a pretty big school. I do think, however, that it can be constructed. There are several examples that I've seen and had the opportunity to visit a couple that I would say are pretty small based on where you enter them. But when you look at the topographical footprint, they're big. But it's, again, part of the design and the access that really makes it feel a lot smoother. And certainly the design of the school and how we run that is in part and play making sure that it fits our student needs. I think a really big important point here is around our learning community, that our students currently now, although I think we provide a wonderful opportunity for them to get connected in their own community school, we do have some opportunity for intra-district participation through some of our recreation activities and community events. But nonetheless, 5th grade or 6th grade currently is a place where they all come together. This would allow that relationship development opportunity to happen earlier. And again, I think that's an important component as well. And then, all of you know, we have 3 equally configured schools, K to 5. It is not easy for us to pull people together for an efficient use of time right after school or before school. And again, having our teachers in a single location in the K4 area and in the 5-8 would be a significant opportunity to continue to increase our professional development work that we're trying to do. So these are the other documents that I talked about. Again, you can click on the board, and again, I'll make this available. This is the master planning and visioning document that I referenced earlier that I said be careful not to just press quickly print. Our stewardship plan, again, the work of John and his staff, Annette, around populating that is available. And this 21st Learning, this is what I referred to, again, comes from Dor Whittier with some other clips that you can click on and get a little bit more of an idea of the 21st century, often overused phraseology that happens regarding that. So, questions from the board, a lot. I think also important for the rest of the community to know, the audience, I haven't given this to the board, I'm giving this to the board tonight. And they have a lot of reading material in front of them. They haven't had the opportunity to pre-read anything associated with it. So let me stop and let me listen.
Yeah, I guess I can go first.
Thanks, John.
I feel a little shell-shocked.
Yeah, I'm a little shell-shocked in I have read the master planning vision at least a couple times. I'm not convinced today, and I don't think that was your point, but there are things that I'm going to need to see, I think, to be convinced that this is a recommendation that I can support. And I'll just list a few of them, and there may be more, but they're kind of broad. I'm not convinced, but maybe I can be, that the new facility will save us money through efficiency. I'm not convinced, and again, maybe could be, that a new facility or this recommendation will help us achieve our district's ends relative to how much it might cost. I'm also not convinced that whether we can ask the community or whether the community can pay for this, particularly while funding other needs, in other words, the opportunity costs. If we are maxing out our capacity to pay taxes in the district for building the new facility, are we still going to be able to do the high school renovations that we need to do? Are we going to have to cut programming? So I'm also, I really need to understand how we would be paying for this if we're not, if it's not going to be completely coming from the taxpayers and higher property taxes, how that will be done. I think a couple more minor points is, there are certain options that have been floated and I'm still missing, I want to understand why they don't work. And I also, going to the idea of public input, I think the public, we shouldn't be seeking public input just on this recommendation, as you suggested in your overview. I think we need to, we need more input on some other options and the pluses and minuses. And one that is missing and was missing, I think, from the task force is accommodating this with our current facilities. Whether that means keeping all three of them open, the elementary schools, or combining into two of those three, whatever those two would be. I think that needs to be put out there as one of the options to be receiving input on, along with, the couple that the task force had picked. So, that's a lot. I think there's a lot of information that I think I still need to.
Good questions. I was a little remiss in not bringing you back to the visual imagery that I was trying to present to around the opportunity line, fairly consistent, increasing budget, focus on that occurring, downward trending enrollment. When you put those together, when I did, and again, what I wanted to try to do visually would be to kind of give you the graph overlay, although the scalability on that vertical column is very different when you're looking at all of those graphs. What I really wanted to be able to do was try to put those on top of each other for you. And when I did that and I've been working at this for a long time with staff, when I'm doing that, I get to kind of that 2019 and 20 mark where I see we're going to be in a place where we're going to have to make some big decisions. And those big decisions are going to represent that we're going to have to reduce our overall operating budget cost. We're going to have to do that unless things significantly change in our city and in our state. That enrollment, the cost increases, our population, I see that 2019-20 time as a decision point. And I think what's going to end up happening, if, again, I'm here and administrators, we're going to say the only way we can do this is we're going to have to reduce staffing and we're going to have to reduce some opportunities to students. I don't know how much, but I know that that's likely going to be on the horizon. Part of what I think, again, this is, again, the recommendation of getting some further advisement around what if these schools, again, through city or through an RFP process, that comes back into an available cash. What would be our bonded borrowing debt that we could go? What would be the likelihood if City Center develops at the high end? What would that generate for property taxes, business development? What would that do for us that would hope to avoid the 2019-20, what I'm going to say, demarcation or decision point that I see happening? I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we're going to continue to work to meet our ends regardless of the configuration. But some of the scenarios that we have seen in the last 5 years have been, contingency teachers for certain grades. We've made some of these decisions, although not often, but we've made some of these decisions to add staffing. So if we do go to a 2-school, I see that continuing to be still a major player. Currently at the middle school and the high school, currently in the middle school particularly, we are able to absorb. We have much greater flexibility as a single middle school to absorb, that flux. And we've been able to maintain our opportunities pretty solidly, with the exception when we make reductions in certain programming at the elementary that push into creating a classroom teacher that may need to come here too.
So is that because of the size of the school, David, or because of the maturation of kids in these buildings?
Well, it really is. My feeling is that we get our best, our most stable environment from a single school. And that when in the middle school, for example, we service most our students, provide that learning experience through 8 teachers, right? And currently now we're at the elementary school in 4th grade, we're at 9 in the district. We have rarely ever had to add, more than 8 to our core. At least I've never had since I've been here. We're able to absorb that because of the N number and the divisor of 8. We're able to do that. And I think that's really important for sustainability of programming, relationship development, all of the things that we know are critically important. Professional development, is really important from my perspective.
But I guess, going back to what your explanation was, that it sounds good in theory, but I just don't see the facts that show that that theory will work. And I'm not saying that we won't be able to see them, but that's what we need to see. Again, if we could sell the 3 schools and come up with a beautiful new facility that would, based on what we sell our current property for, that would be a different discussion, but we don't even know that that's even close to the case. Or how much we're gonna have to, if we have to go to the taxpayers and ask for $20 million in bonded debt, are we gonna be able to go back and ask for another $20 million of bonded debt to do what we need to do at the high school?
Right.
And to keep the programming and such, so.
Excellent point, and part of why I'm recommending some sort of expertise that are more astute to forecasting, that's not within my bucket of knowledge. I think that part of the phasing the concept that I was coming up with was phase 1 is kind of this bucket of work, but being very cognizant of the needs at the high school, and that part of the determination of the move forward of the high school would be determined on how we would do as a result of the work of a consolidated elementary school. Again, I'm not in this. I don't do this, but if we build a brand new elementary school and the city's doing a city center, and there's a huge in-migration of people who are interested in what we provide in South Burlington, educationally and community-wise, that has a significant impact that may help then prove out the phase 3 of what would be the available resources and the things that we could get done at the high school to continue to move that school along. Definitely, the high school in a whole different area. Through conversations, the high school and the middle school are, for the learning, centered in where we are in South Burlington, remains, I think, a very powerful and appropriate part of when we talk about personal learning plans and PBGRs. Very, very, I think, important to be within this envelope there where we currently are as a high school and middle school cross campus. So I'm not, I think these are all excellent concerns. I'm not wanting to defend this. I do think, for me, I need further information to further my affirmation of this as well. I don't have all those, and I'm obviously not privy to go out and solicit that. I want that to be part of, a direction that the board would wish to go to when we can answer all of these other questions. So I know that one thing we didn't do very well, and John, maybe you can comment on the operating side of the budget. Clearly, what we looked at is all of this combined. When we combine staffing, when we combine stewardship, all of those factors were combined. Now, when we take away the stewardship plan, and I didn't do that modeling. We didn't do the modeling. If we take that all out, we don't do any stewardship. We're going to have an obligation, obviously, to do things up until the time we don't occupy. But we didn't take out that other part of that around the operational stewardship, other factors that are in play around the budgeting process that I think are important.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, Dave, first off, thank you. We've been asking for you to kind of weigh in with an option, and I'm sure this represents a lot of work and a lot of thinking on your part. I look at this and my takeaway is really it's your best hypothesis at this point with a need to sort of prove or disprove some of the assumptions you've made here.
Right.
Martin, I think you phrase it really well in terms of, I also feel like I'm not persuaded yet, which is okay. I think that's part of what you have to collectively do and kind of provide some direction to you and your team and potentially outside resources to get to that. The areas that kind of called out for me is just clarity on the baseline and forecasted operating expenses of a status quo scenario. So to Martin, to your point, is if everything continued to operate as usual, we're going to have, we know the stewardship side. I think we also need to be clear on the operating expenses. And I think there are also some declining opportunities that would
present themselves on a going forward basis with further aging of facilities and kind of go down the road with issues that might affect staffing, like very small classroom
Right.
sizes in some of the operations. So I think there's a baseline scenario that I think we can articulate better to the community. I think we need to be really clear on staffing levels in here. I think you have some aggregated numbers for K through 5 in here, but not for the overall district and maybe not by groups of staffing. So we do know that enrollment is declining and staffing is at minimum flat, but probably
Yeah.
slightly growing, and we need to have visibility to that, probably at least at the facility level. I think financials obviously are critical here, and I'm assuming that you've indicated the additional support or expertise you're looking for would call that out. And then the funding mechanism, which Martin mentioned as well. Relative to your comment, Martin, I do think it would be good to have some alternative to take to the community to respond to. I don't know if it's the one you're suggesting or not. That's probably, when I think about being persuaded, I think we need to kind of make a commitment, not necessarily to one or the best one, but have equally weighted options, and it may be a status quo and something else, and that may bring us to that feedback may bring us to another alternative later. I don't know what the right way to do that is, or to put 3 alternatives out there that status quo, what you're recommending, and something in the middle. My own bias is probably that I worry about feedback getting a little bit diluted when there's too many choices. Whereas I think if it's sort of a clear choice, then you know where community values lie. And not to say that's the end game, but that might result in some fine tuning of an option down the road. So again, I don't really know the answer to that, but to your point, Martin, I question how that feedback might inform the board, depending on what the other option is. But if more than one is presented, it has, in my mind, it has to be equally vetted in terms of the impact on student opportunities and outcomes and the funding mechanism as well as the economic implications.
That resonates, to be very logical to me. I think that this is, I maybe have concluded a portion of the equation, a big portion of the equation that may inform my additional thinking is in part in play that funding mechanism. It's the forecasted future. I'm sure there's expertise out there. If I knew that this move would develop a city center that's going to create I'm exaggerating, high dollars of return into the tax base, if it's going to generate a huge interest in our community and have our homes significantly develop and bring in new students, if I could have that part of the equation based on this activity, that I think would be significant. Or in some ways, if it's not significant, it's not going to have a major it's likely maybe not going to be that significant. The funding mechanisms in percentage of local option tax or in the percentage of the sale of these properties may not bring that. I would absolutely say to you that option of a single elementary school is not feasible given the taxation envelope forward. So that's a very critical part for me. I do not want to be, I won't be here 52 years from now, but I don't want to be any part of something that was strapping our community into the future. I'm proud of our community. We have many great things going on. We have great community, great parents. I'd like to see that continue. Part of that, big part is you got to balance all of the equations here. Good education, good opportunity for business, good, tax forecasting, et cetera. Otherwise, not going to work. You can grab a great school, but you don't have kids that are going to fill it. It's going to be a problem. So I like the idea of if you pick one or two and you run the same kind of cost-benefit analysis around them. Again, I'm talking not necessarily with great clarity because I don't know what some of that work would be.
Just, I think what's most missing is having the status quo and laying out what that means for us, including the detriments of continuing with the status quo. And that's never really been put there, either the pluses or minuses
Yeah.
of the status quo to compare with these two action alternatives
Yeah.
that you have there in the task force report.
The only thing I can say to that is what I've tried to present, although clarity of all of the the gathering, all of those slides together, I believe that there's pretty certain clarity. I could be off by a couple of years, but there's pretty, and I know Dan has done a fair amount of work on behalf of the board as well, looking at our data. And in fact, looking at that, a lot of it came to light for me and say, you know, we've had this conversation before. That 2019 and 20 year, which isn't that far away, I think, again, we can challenge the state and the funding thresholds and things of that nature. But the reality is, with our forecasted enrollment within the state and the draw on the ed fund and the things we're trying to do in maintaining the properties that we have, I think we're in a likely forecasted future where we're going to be in a pretty big decision in that 19, 20, 21 timeframe. And I would rather, and I know you would too, be proactive as opposed to reactive. I'd like to get out of the reactive prognosis. So.
Well, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Martin, but I think part of what you're saying, David, is sort of the individual trend lines, and I think we need to articulate that, some specifics to a community member that in kind of a very fundamental way says, here's the perfect storm that's coming. And it includes declining enrollment, it includes a cap on tax or on budget increases for our district that would put us in potentially a double taxation mode. I mean, we can list those variables and articulate those in a way with some level of certainty or risk that I think, you know, the community can understand, okay, this is what it means to continue to operate 5 facilities in South Burlington.
And following up with that, and how this recommendation would resolve that problem,
Yep.
obviously.
As we talked about the status quo option a few minutes ago, one thing I want to be sensitive to is, you know, you could define status quo 2 ways. Our existing structures, kind of as they sit in our existing structures, moving forward and without new buildings in a 21st century learning model.
Mm-hmm.
And I
And the
don't think
modification.
it's reasonable that we would think the first option I just talked about would be something we would want to consider at all. We have to continue to evolve even if we have to do it within these structures. So I think the cost of that is the baseline for my view of what makes sense compared to some other option.
Yeah, that's a good point, Patrick, because the cost of retrofitting aging facilities to meet those 21st century standards, even though I'm the one that accuses us of overusing that word.
But
You're absolutely right.
that is the baseline to me.
Right, well, I guess yeah, I would have to be convinced that that's the baseline necessarily as well, as far as particularly with respect to elementary schools, in how much retrofitting really needs to be done with elementary schools as opposed to, I'm fairly convinced already as far as a high school and probably the middle school, but not so much with respect to elementary school.
And I don't want to portray that there'd be huge retrofit. I mean, part of what we presented here and with John's help, I did not inflate, even in like the stewardship plan, you saw those, as we get out into the future look, I mean, we could have, increased that expenditure line quite a significant amount with the aging facility. But, this is what we have on the book currently, and we've really tried to be very, mindful of the cost. I think the retrofitting, we did do some really good work in 1995 in this district, part of that bond that you saw. We made some really important upgrades that I would say were very much in concert with 21st century. But we still have some of the issues that we've talked about tonight earlier around the class size that, it wasn't designed to have any of the technology in it. It wasn't designed that way. It's very, very different. That's just the physical structure, not necessarily talking about the ability for students to flow and move and be part of, that active education environment. So I think Martin's right. I don't want to present that that our elementaries are in dire strait. I think they support our learning pretty well, but it's not a status quo. It's you got to continue to be moving forward and
Well, and
looking
I
at
don't
that.
see the implications necessarily being all retrofit.
Right.
Because what we're seeing with some of the forecasting is there would be very small class sizes at
Right.
existing
Right.
facilities, for instance. So there might be one first grade classroom and one first grade teacher.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
But that obviously wouldn't be a great opportunity for kids.
Are the NEASC recommendations in totality somewhere
Yes, they are.
we can access?
Yep. Yeah, we can, and I can make those available, to you. This is not the first time we've had several NEAS visits, and there's been recommendations. And I would say those recommendations, sometimes people can say, well, why is it that we're putting all our eggs in the NEAS component? And they're very much in parallel with, the specifics that we've received, whether it's from our consultants that have looked at our facility on ADA compliant. I mean, it's fairly consistent with the NEAS work. So, again, probably important that we define that a little bit better going forward. I know this is a lot of information, and again, I think important for the community to know, I hadn't given this to the board. My recommendation to the board, Elizabeth, would be that you have the opportunity to digest and maybe ask some additional questions to me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe then we would come back together. I have some some ideas, but we would formulate that into some ideas of next steps and have this again on a board meeting to talk about.
Okay.
And that would be my recommendation. I don't know what you're thinking.
Well, and I think it might be helpful if you had a specific recommendation on some expertise, if you could
Mhm.
flesh out specifically what you're talking about there. I think that would be helpful.
Mhm.
I know we're getting kind of at time on our agenda, but I believe some of our community members are here to listen to this discussion. So if we can keep it brief, are there specific comments or questions from the public? Yes.
Tim Barrett, I just want to point out that who the stakeholders are in this process, right? So the stakeholders are the parents of kids who attend the schools in the city, the taxpayers in the city, the city administration, and the school board as well, right? So we're all stakeholders in this. And I want to express my displeasure that in the process of coming up with these options, that there was a lack of input by the public into the whole process for all the stakeholders, especially the public, and especially the taxpayers. So I think you need to move back to square one, and just as Mr. Lalonde stated, it would be great to have some sort of a set of data presented saying this is the status quo going out through these years, and here are the options that we're looking at. We have declining enrollment. It gets to a low enough point where you want to build a new school. And that might then foster some discussion in the community to understand the logic behind declining enrollment, building a new school. Because, I mean, I know that your number one expense right now is the teachers. And I look at the school board to be the deployment masters of the teachers. They deploy the teachers to the classrooms and assemble the students in the proper organizations to generate the best education they can, generate those possibilities. So, in a sense, teacher salaries are the number one highest level of cost to the budget. I'm just astounded that South Burlington would think of that as those keep going up, they find another way to raise the tax base by investing in capital at a time when you already have enough capital, you already have enough buildings. So that's the type of thing that you need to get out in front of the public to explain your logic and reasoning with all of the numbers starting with no changes at all, the numbers at the other end with building a single elementary school. So I just want to impress you with that. That has to be done because you will not get the response from the public to really understand this thought process that the superintendent has gone through to reach this conclusion and convince the taxpayers and then make them responsible for that future cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Yes.
Bridget Burkhart, I'm a
mom of 2 little people who will be in the school system. And one thing, I fully support Mr. Barrett's comments. Those were comments I was going to make too. But I also feel that as a parent, I'd like to see a little bit more discussion about what the benefits are from a learning perspective for the students of this whole, any option that we choose that's different from the status quo. Because I see a lot of language, not just in this document, but in the documents that I read online, about real estate investment advisors and development, and all of those things are important, and it's important how our schools fit in with the growth of the community and the changes of the community. But I really think we need to be thinking about the students, and there needs to be some discussion around, is one elementary school really the right way to go for elementary school level kids? Obviously, it's working very well for the middle school and the high school, but is that really the right way to go from a learning perspective? And if it is, those pluses need to be communicated a little bit better to the parents and to the community, I think, because I'm not the only person I've talked to who's a little concerned about this whole idea from an educational perspective.
Thank
Can
you.
I just make a real quick?
Sure.
And I use probably shorthand at getting at that point where I said, we haven't been convinced, or I haven't been convinced that new facilities needed to help us achieve our ends. And our ends are specifically what our student outcomes are. And they're listed on our website as far as, what those are. And it includes along the lines of what you were just saying.
Right, and that's why it really resonated with me when you said I'm not convinced, because that's kind of where I felt when I read a lot of this. From a learning ends perspective, I'm not quite convinced that maybe one larger school is necessarily going to meet those ends better than the way things are configured, or a different configuration. I really, for example, liked the minority report and the sort of potential for 2 separate K through 4 schools, or K through 5 even, in discussions I've had with other people. But anyway.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Erin Sutherland. I've said this before, and as Tim has said, the community really needs to get a little bit more involved in this. It's not, the same people always coming, and it does appear to people who aren't involved that it's like, who's scratching who's back? Like, is this for city center? Is this really for the kids? And the declining enrollment looks about 50 kids for the whole district. So I know in my neighborhood, there's 4 babies on their way. I don't really know where we're at, and we're not in a new build neighborhood or anything like that. So I think 50 kids, we whoopsed this year. Maybe we should kind of hold back. It's not like projected 10 years from now we're going to be 200 kids less. That would be, we should probably do something. But right now we're looking at 50, and there are things we could do, and definitely getting the community involved, because I think you're going to get a lot of irate parents, and they're, I'll be one, and obviously I'm loud and I'll get a lot of people involved in it, but I just don't know how this is really the right thing at this point. I don't want to be like, all right, I'm going to put all this money in for the elementary school, when really what we need and we hear complaints about is the high school. So I would prefer to pay more in my taxes for a newer high school than I would for an elementary school. I just don't think we've really gotten the whole gist of what the community would really want, and I think that's where we need to start.
Thanks.
I have a quick follow-up question for the my name is Mara Graff. I'm a community member. This is my first time at this meeting and first time looking at these numbers. So I'm looking at the chart for number students for grades K through 8. Is it correct, is that the actual number on the vertical axis showing that, so the projection is that between 2010 and 2025, this decline in enrollment that everyone is talking about, it's just over 100 students? Yeah, is that what we're?
Yeah, that's again just in the K-8 environment, and this is pulling right from the demographic study that was there. So it does not combine into the high school. So obviously, the high school would be, yeah.
So I will be curious to see the proper report, but I think I agree with all the comments that have been made that we really need to see more, especially with regard to these projections and these concerns about this declining enrollment, because it seems to me as though there must be other alternatives if that's the number we're talking about in terms of population decline.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Emily Hoffman. I have 3 kids at Orchard and 1 on the way. And I don't need to take up time because I have a lot to say that everybody else had to say. But disheartened at the lack of community input, and Mr. Young has gone to a lot of work to put something together that might not even be remotely accepted by the community. And so I just feel like it would really behoove everybody in this whole process to listen to what the community is saying. And I was at the March 31st meeting, and it was nothing like anything like this. It was the opposite, actually. So I really think that it would be really important to talk to the community, as we've all said, because everyone I've talked to is shocked that this is even a suggestion. And I like the idea of thinking about the kids and whether a first grader needs to be in a school where there's 9 other first grade classrooms. I mean, and some of the reasons why this is a good idea, all the buses go to the same school. Okay, well, my kindergartner already has a hard time finding their bus at Orchard. Why would they find it easier to find their bus when there's all multiplied by 3 at one school? So I want to be convinced too. I can get really passionate, but I could be wrong. So I just want to learn more. I want it to be layman's down for understanding why this is really what's best for the kids, not for the city center or for anything else, but just for the kids. So that's all.
Thank you. Back there?
Hi, Chris Noster. I have one daughter at Orchard and 2 more little people on the way to help boost enrollment numbers. So I'm trying to stay open-minded, but I share a lot of the concerns already mentioned. So for me, I look at 2 ways. As a taxpayer and property owner, I really want to understand the financials and understand if we spend $20 million to build a new facility, how long could $20 million maintain our current infrastructure, right? With that payback period. And the second part for me, we moved here. This is our 3rd year in Orchard schools. One of the reasons we chose to live in this community was because of the community schools. We have people come visit us and they're blown away by the way the schools are set up. So I want to make sure we understand what that impact is. If we move one elementary school somewhere else in South Burlington, what does that do to the community?
Thank you.
I was going to ask David, I was surprised in reading this tonight that there was so much conversation about elementary and so little conversation about high school needs, because I think we all left previous conversations understanding how important a strong high school is in terms of us competing with other towns that try to attract students that can choose where to go for high school. And I guess I would love to hear your thoughts on how that fits into this, because it does seem to be very elementary focused.
So, again, it wasn't, I want to really be clear that I'm not omitting any of the important work that was done. In fact, I think in phase 2 and phase 3, around the financial information would be feeding, the critical needs of the high school. But I kind of tiered these into what I would say the more immediate focus. And then, yep. So the immediate focus, similar. Yeah, so I think the immediate focus, if again, I would love that our enrollment issues would only get better, but that's not what we're being provided. That's not what's happening nationally, So it's part of the trusted work that we have to put in with our demographers. So I see the first tier issue really is the elementary, to try to be least disruptive to our children around allocating of resources to ensure that we provide them what we believe important. Similar to what went on tonight, and again, I take full responsibility for allocating resources, but I mean, I did not have that crystal ball. Some of you would have liked me to have it, to allocate those resources, but going forward, I think that's only going to get more complicated. I'm simply wanting to have this conversation, and I absolutely agree with everybody that more conversations are needed, and perhaps the financial of this next step may not pan out to be appropriate to have a single elementary, and maybe we just can't do that given the financial forecast. But I do see that as important. So the high school is a very critical part of that, and I would say critically important, but the first focus is looking at this elementary. Again, the foundation of education starts in elementary. We need to make sure that stays strong, those building blocks are secure and appropriate, so that our kids can continue to aspire through our system with the right foundational supports. I don't want to be in a situation, I hate that, when we have to say, I got to cut a portion of, art, music, or phys ed out because we don't quite have the sections, and we're really concerned about the budget. Or I don't want to be in a situation where we're going to have to, eliminate, something that we really think is important in one of our schools. So I'd like to get out of that and again, be conscious around how to continue to move forward with the means to do so without strapping our community and our taxpayers.
The piece that I'm curious about with the timing is there are so many questions about what will happen with City Center and what it will bring in terms of people and money
That's right.
and new housing. But also the Cropper report does not include any significant changes to a city.
Right.
So we don't know if the city center area will end up having a lot of residential on it. We just
Right.
don't know yet. And so in that
We challenged
instance-
Mr. Cropper, if you remember, and actually it wasn't Mr. Cropper, it was one of his,
Jerry
Mr. McGibbon, Jerry, right, thank you. We challenged him on some of those, and again, it didn't change that. But this is in part and plate, Monica, to my recommendation, is that I made this recommendation with the caveat that we need a whole lot more information, and I need some help here, around getting some additional clarity around what that would bring, what would the development of a city center bring, kind of in that high, middle, and low. So that would inform kind of our financial forecasted flow to see what we could.
So if I'm allowed one more follow-up, in terms of community feedback, I may suggest that you can ask the community about timing as well, because if there are so many unknowns, it's a lot of risk to ask taxpayers to consider something with such quick turnaround as you're recommending here.
Yeah, again,
if there are so many unknowns.
This is my recommendation, and the board's giving me feedback as well as you are. Again, I'm putting something out there. I mean, this is, honestly, I wish we didn't have to be having these conversations, but we are who we are, and we have some things happening, and I'm in the position, to try to provide some next steps. So, I really appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, we'll take one more question here.
Hi, Alan Margulies. I've got 3 kids in the system. I think one of the big takeaways for me is there's just not a lot of discussion about educational excellence sort of in this whole process, which concerns me because I think that is our goal in this group. And I think that the decision, I think, lies with this is an education decision. It's not a city center decision. I think I would ask the school board, I think the community feels like they need more clarity on the process. Somehow this is tied to city center and city council, and they've got a pretty good PR machine going. I'll come to these meetings and I'll hear one thing and I'll read the other paper, a couple of days later, and it sounds like this thing is about to happen, when that's not the case. So I would ask of the school board, if you can put forward sort of a strong point of view. Like at this point, we can almost forget about the master planning task force. That was just to inform, and now you guys are the decision makers. And is it just assumed that we're going to bring this to a vote? Or is this worthwhile bringing to a community vote? It strikes me that we've got limited bandwidth as administrators. David, I appreciate the job you have to do every day with your staff, as a school board and as a community. And I know we manage this from an ends point of view, but does that keep us focused on sort of core priorities? Like, we've had a few strategic proposals over the last 3 years that have taken a lot of bandwidth, none of which have actually come to fruition. And I would like to see sort of more focus on educational excellence in singles and doubles. And I'd like us to sort of be cautious about the train leaving the station on this proposal so that we don't sink a bunch of time and energy in on something that may or may not help us get to where we want to go. I just would like the board to have sort of clarity and communicate that to the community about how we decide, is this worth more time or not relative to our other priorities.
Well, we're gonna move on with our agenda, but I will close by saying, the city and the school do share a common taxpayer. So where we can collaborate, we try to. But that said, this board's function is the public education delivery within South Burlington to the 2,500 students we serve and their families. So I think this board's been really good about keeping that as the priority, and whatever you may hear in the press is, you're hearing the deliberations you're hearing tonight are kind of where we're at with the process. So thank you all for the feedback. All right, why don't we move on? A little bit behind here.
move on to agenda item number 10.
Yes. So this is the support staff retirement fund, and it's in your packet. John has put together some information. This is specific to paying back the $100,000 that we use from the retirement fund to address the drainage problem at Orchard.
So, can I make this, just make a motion that we approve?
I had a couple questions first.
We get questions after.
So we
the
have-
motion.
we have a motion.
If there's no motion, you
I'll
don't.
second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We'll open it up for questions.
Well, I guess the one question is, does the fact that we have approved an additional hire, which is gonna cost about $50-some thousand, is that affect whether we should be putting this $100,000 back into the pension fund, particularly since we're already paying over what the recommended amount is? The second, similar related questions, is does the cap affect that? I mean, if we had that $100,000 as a carryover amount, will that help us meet the spending cap? Or are we fine even if we take this $100,000 and put it into the pension fund? So those are kind of the two related questions.
Second question, it would help us with the cap. First question,
It would help us with the cap
if we didn't fund the retirement system.
Right. So let me.
'Cause we'll carry that
press
forward.
that one just a
Carry
little
over.
bit more then. I mean, what are we gonna otherwise forego to try to meet that cap if we don't have this $100,000 in there? Is it like, that would be money we'd have in contingency funding? I know it's kind of a little early in the budgeting process to
Well,
know that exactly, but.
I'll be brief, it's gonna be hard to budget for a 1.72 increase. Every dime we have into that helps. But on the other hand, the
Liability.
recommendation has to be with that cap to only fund the minimum contribution going forward as long as there's a cap, because we don't have any extra. So that's where I stand on it.
So knowing that, you're standing by as far as the recommendation is to put the $100,000.
Right, because I don't see, looking out at least these next 2 years, that we can put anything extra in there.
This is the time to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And on the other one, I'm sorry, I cut you off before you answered the question about the hiring the teacher.
The hiring of the teacher, I mean, obviously, every dime unspent helps us either this year for fiscal 18 carryover. But the significant difference in salary and benefits for new hires, it's a lot more significant than we planned in the budget. Because we have no requirement that people tell you early that they're gonna retire. So that's kind of be blunt about it, but that's.
Again, we've given you a little bit of information on that in the past. although,
Just related to that, will putting this additional 100,000 in be reflected as a reduction in the required payment in the future?
Yes, in fact, if we do it in the next 10 days, it will actually affect our actuary valuation in the current status. A little bit, because everything's $100,000 over a $10 million liability is not great, but it's certainly something.
So we have a motion and a second. Any additional questions or comments? All in favor of accepting administration's proposal to, I have to find the summary of it.
Support the staff
To
retirement
support
fund.
this, yeah, to reinstate the support staff retirement fund contribution. All in favor?
Aye.
And the motion passes. Have to work on that wording. All right, we'll move on to agenda item number 11.
Yeah. So this is the first go-round of our graduation policy. This is in part and play connected to the class of 2020. We'll need to meet our proficiency standards, and so it walks into this. Again, this is our first shot at this. On the back of this also is an example of what was, I think, well, not recently, back in April, adopted by Mount Mansfield, or their new supervisory union district that Stuart provided as well. So again, this is, I don't know, I think part of this is just an important conversation for you to begin to start having with us. We do wind in the importance of students meeting our South Burlington ends, which is also connected. It sometimes feels like it's an add-on perhaps, but anyway, let us take comments and questions. Stuart, do you have anything you want to add to this?
Well, I just want to state that if you looked at the EQS, for example, we basically used their format, but we put in what we consider to be our proficiencies versus there in those parentheses. So there are indicators for each of those proficiencies which would not be part of policy, that would be part of procedure, but that when you look at science and it says scientific inquiry, investigations, conceptual thinking, and synthesizing information, those are our proficiencies, not the state's. That's not what they say about science per se. And they're indicators for every single one of those proficiencies in all those subjects.
Where did the subjects come from?
You mean such as technology, world language?
Yeah.
So they come from both the EQS and actually from your content standard on ends. So those two documents together were what, because actually the state puts world language with social studies as one thing under the EQS, but we separated it back out, one, because we think they're both separate things that need to have proficiencies, and the ends also put them out that way.
So in the Education Quality Standards Rule 2000, one would find the details for all of these? I kind of was looking.
There's a list. I can pull it up if you really wanted to see it, but basically, so that, for example, they use the term literacy in the EQS as opposed to like English language arts.
Right.
And so on. And so in general, we've used their language. Again, there are a few places because of what our ends say that we used our own language to determine what the main topics were. And these are what we worked on last year to develop the proficiencies in. So each one of these departments, under the leadership of their CSs at the high school, basically worked on these proficiencies and the indicators last year at the high school level.
Actually, on the pointing to the ends, I have some issues with that on whether that should be in here. You'll be perhaps surprised to know, since I always push for the ends. And the reason I say that is that, I mean, I don't want to be inconsistent with past things that I've said, but, you know, I still believe that on an individual student basis, we should be evaluating how we're doing on all of our ends. And that should come up to the board to review how we're doing as a school district. But that doesn't mean that all of those specific ends underneath lifelong learning and such, or under citizenship, is a graduation requirement. I mean, I'm not going to require somebody to have fun, which is our end number 6 under citizenship, or 5, to be able to graduate. Or the leadership. We want to teach them leadership and such, but some kids are going to follow, and that's fine. So, I mean, but that's one of our ends. So I'm a little concerned about having for graduation requirements, at least some of the ends. So
I'm certainly not going to disagree, Martin, and if you want to take the ends out, that would be interesting. But I want to point out that we didn't point out the indicators of the ends. You know, in other words, when we say a disposition for lifelong learning, there's nothing here that says you have to have every disposition to show us that you have a disposition for lifelong learning to graduate, right? We didn't say you have to have fun to get out. We basically said you have to be a good citizen, you know, and so whether you have all 6 of those ends or enough of them that we can say that, you know, that you're meeting the ends, is an interesting question. I mean, these are, you know, if you look at the Mount Mansfield language, which is a lot less than ours, part of it is to have that kind of flexibility in terms of what does it mean, to graduate. We felt this was enough flexibility within our indicators that we're not going to hold the kid back and say, well, you don't graduate because you didn't have fun, or whatever. Because those are the kinds of things that are going to be procedural questions. When we say reading, we have indicators of reading. Do you need to meet every one of those indicators of reading to graduate, or is it 3 out of 7? We don't know the answer to that question yet. And we're building the performance assessment system that will both reflect that ends, the transferable skills, and those content standards. So we feel we've been general enough not to be caught up in that, somebody say, well, you didn't meet this one indicator, therefore you don't get out of, school.
So, yeah, and I guess I just want to make sure, disposition for lifelong learning, we have listed 6 elements to that. And essentially, those are 6 that go towards disposition for lifelong learning for figuring out proficiency for graduation. Although that's not the way it's worded in the ends policy. We want students to demonstrate the ability, knowledge, and skills to adapt and succeed by each of those 6. I'm fine with what you're saying for proficiency-based graduation, but I don't want to, I don't want to lose the fact that we want to understand how we're doing on each of those subcomponents for our broader purposes of seeing how the district is doing relative to the ends.
Right, and so again, we didn't put the procedural piece in front of you for the policy, but if you've seen some of those documents, but every one of these pieces now have the ends embedded. So what ends go with visual and performing arts as part of the indicators is there, because that's what the performance task assessment system will build. So when it looks at transferable skills, it will also look at specific ends when students are doing those performances.
But the indicators will also provide clarity to the...
Right, but again, indicators, or even the ends, which are at policy level, could change over time. They have changed at least once, and we want to just make sure, but I don't think that main categories will change. We might argue for the next 20 years whether or not we have to have fun. But
maybe that was a bad example. But
no, but it's one of the hardest to measure, so it's actually a good example.
So the other question I had on this overall is, as far as measuring proficiency and our bad experience of the past 15 years, or however many, under the No Child Left Behind Act, and what the administration is going to be doing as far as balancing, making sure that our students are proficient enough and ready for the next step, but not requiring this 100% proficiency. Or are we planning on holding kids back until they're 22 or whatever, until they have shown, how does this practically work, I guess, is where this...
Well, I think that's a really good question, Martin. If you look at the educational quality standards item, it talks about proficiency versus seat time, right? It's no longer talking about Carnegie units. So it could be that you would be proficient, though we don't think most kids will be proficient to the standard we want by the time that you finished your sophomore year, and theoretically you could walk out of high school. It also says that you may not be proficient until you've done a 5th year, and that kind of in the EQS talks about that as a norm. And again, we do have kids who do 5th year kinds of things in order to graduate now under Carnegie units. And we don't think there'll be a significant change. But remember, it's all about a flexible pathway within the high school experience.
Well, then, I'm sorry. So are we going to make sure, though, that we're not trying to just push kids out before they're proficient? And if we're not, and you're saying it's not going to make a big difference between Carnegie units and proficiency, but...
Well, I'm not saying that.
Okay, because if we're not, are we projecting what this is going to do to our budget if we're going to have an extra 100 kids on 5th year?
Yeah, we believe that we're going to build a system, and we're charting it out. This is what a 9th grade experience is. It's one of the reasons we want to do this now, not 2 years from now, even though this is for the class of 2020. We are being very proactive in trying to build a system that next year's 9th graders will come in and, have a clear path for the student who wants to do the traditional kind of high school and the student who's looking for internships and other ways of flexible pathways under this law, but that everybody builds to the same proficiencies in order to get a diploma from the South Burlington High School. And a key difference, for example, let's just take English language arts. In a Carnegie system, I basically can take as a junior and a senior, whether it's public speaking or whatever, you know, I don't have to ever take a writing course. I don't have to prove my proficiency in writing. I just have to have 4 credits of English. And whether I'm writing in those English classes or not, and then I get to college and you know, that's part of where this comes from, I may not be prepared to truly be college ready. But now we're saying you have to have a level of proficiency in writing. And we always did to some extent. You know, it's in the ends, it's in other pieces, but this just clarifies it as part of our graduation requirements, that you have to reach the proficiency that we've determined in writing by the time you graduate. And just in terms of how this all works, right now, this year, the middle school is going to be working at the 8th grade, 7th grade, 6th grade indicators on these same proficiencies. They don't have to come up with new proficiencies. And the year after that, the elementary people will be doing the same, so that we'll be building a K-12 system moving towards these proficiencies with developmentally appropriate indicators.
So we would know in advance probably if we are expecting, in 2021, we're gonna have an extra 100 kids who haven't met their proficiency standards.
We would know that
So
well
we
ahead
will
of
know that
time.
well ahead of time, okay.
Well ahead of time.
I had a quick question around, is the acceptable language to receive a diploma?
Say that again?
Is that going to be the standard language on the proficiency-based graduation requirements? That's the kind of the end game?
Or should it be or something like that?
Yeah,
I can check on that. I mean,
It just, I don't know.
seems, yeah.
you're the grantor of the diploma. We could say to grant a diploma. I mean, we can verify, you know,
To
what the
receive.
I
language
didn't
should
know
be
if that,
effective.
it looked like that was the,
No, we took that language from the Mount Mansfield Unified School District, whatever it's, you know.
and another
name
question
the same.
is, in one of these, we've cited a Vermont statute. Are there other statutes that should be cited, or for consistency's sake, should that be taken out? Is there some reason it's
Yeah, on the
specifically
rules
cited?
specific.
It was
EQS.
cited because it's actually one of the few cited in EQS.
Mhm.
I cited that statute because actually the only specific kinds of pieces related to what's in the EQS in terms of mandatory time, there is actually still mandatory time, while not Carnegie units, for how much physical education and health education a student has. There is no mandatory around English or literacy. You know, in other words, if you can meet all your proficiencies in 1 year, but actually there are statute about the minimum amount of seat time you have to have in physical education and health. So that's why
They
there
don't
is
mean
a
seat
statute.
time. So there's no other Vermont statutes that apply to?
Not to these, except for
and
the
then
EQS, that's the Vermont statute that applies.
All right, and then I do concur with David's opening remark that it did seem like the ends just got tagged on, but I think we just had a pretty good conversation about that. That's the way it came across to me when I looked at it.
So I'm wondering just some next steps. I mean, part of this, we have a requirement that we have this adopted by when, Stuart, the timeline?
Well,
I mean,
you know, we
haven't-
want to start the first reading now because really, by the time the course catalog comes out at the latest, we would like to have it adopted, but also if there were going to be significant changes, I mean, like I said, these are the proficiencies the staff worked on last year in the indicators, and if a proficiency was going to change, not the general gist, we really need to know that now because we don't want to go too far up a tree. But if we're talking about, you know, just like, you know, questions about things like should it be received or grant a diploma, small pieces, where does the ends, you know, fit in the writing of the policy, that stuff, you know, we could take certainly more time. But if somebody was to come and say to me, well, I don't think communication should be part of world language, I would need to know that now. I don't expect that's your concerns, but that would be needed to be known.
Stuart, just to clarify something, my own ignorance. Does family and consumer science include things like personal finance?
Yes, it does. So that, under the Family and Consumer Science.
It's an elective, though.
Right, but.
It would be part
But
of the proficiency.
there are, within the proficiencies, it just changed because you have to show somewhere that you've gotten those proficiencies, either by taking that elective, doing some other kind of flexible pathway. But those proficiencies will now be part of the graduation requirements.
For the 2020 year.
For the 2020, not for your kid now.
Right. I'm just saying, I don't.
No,
I don't do
yeah,
that.
he's got a lot of work to do between now and then. No, this is for 2020, and that's to build that so that kids would know, because remember that this is also related to personal learning plans, right? Students who are be coming in, next year will all have had personal learning plans that have been developed, and part of what they'll have to show in their personal learning plans is where they're getting these proficiencies. Mostly, certainly to start, will be through coursework. Over time, that may evolve to partnerships with business and other ways. But in the end, the gist of this is, we're trying not, is to make sure that when those kids come in next year, and starting actually in January when they get their course, choices and begin to fill those out, that they would know what proficiencies go with what course for ninth graders, and therefore they could begin to choose and build that into their plan.
So can I make a recommendation for the policy next meeting?
Perfect.
This might be a little different for a policy, but after each of these, can there be a link to where the details are?
Mhm.
Because, this is really, really high level. And I dug down a little bit just with respect to literacy, just to see where this connected, that there actually were measurable proficiencies, and they're there. But can, for each of these, have that kind of link? So, and plan on having that in the policy, so if somebody looks at this policy, they can click and get to that, including us while we're considering whether to.
And I'm happy to do that. I just want to be really clear that we don't make the indicators part of the policy, because the indicators are the procedures by which we measure these, and we just really don't want to have that to be something like if we said, oh, it's now this instead of that, that it would have to come to the board. So I just want to be clear that these are links to indicators or procedures or whatever we want to call them, and not part of policy.
Right.
But I don't have a problem with that,
Right,
Martin.
right.
We can do that.
It's to help.
Yes.
Clarify.
Understand what the policy really means.
So how many readings do you have to have?
It's a policy.
Yep.
So, and the other
It's a regular
question I
policy.
have, and maybe for the second reading, there can be a little clarification around, I found it a little bit inconsistent, the choice of what was put into parens. So by way of example, there's motor skills and strategy under physical education and health education. And that, I guess maybe I just need a little explanation of these. And then under mathematical content, it's really active verbs of express, solve, and apply.
Seem
And
very
then
disparate.
there'll be geography under social studies. So
Right.
that
Knowledge seems to
seems,
sit funny, yeah.
yeah.
Well,
it's-
again, these were worked from a variety of documents and different depth. But I think that if I make the links that Martin has asked, that I think that will answer some of your questions, because then you can look at, what do they actually mean when they say
Knowledge.
knowledge.
Good.
All right.
Thanks, Stuart.
All right, we'll move on to, unless there's other questions, move on to agenda item 12. And I think David and I just had a quick sidebar that we can move 2.3.
I think that.
It can be
Might be
quick,
quick.
but, and the ends monitoring you have in your packet, if we just, oh, Martin, I see.
I thought it was absolutely
If
lovely.
you thought that, then we might be able to get through it.
I think I'm the one who had the problems, and I looked at it and I thought it was good.
Well, do you want to make an attempt at 2.3 then here?
Let's go for it.
All right, let's go for it.
Okay.
So I was okay with the superintendent's interpretation. And I noticed that it's new. It's kind of added some stuff.
Do you have copies? No, the copies are here.
Yeah, they were over.
on the table,
They were over there.
gone.
Here, I'll give you mine.
Thank you, Stuart.
So there was a change under interpretation. Any comments, questions?
I thought it got at the point that we were talking about at the last meeting.
All right, so if we move to evidence on page 2.
I also thought the evidence addressed the concern that we had at the last meeting.
Any other comments on page 2 changes? All right, shall we go through the assessment? Is that?
Yes.
That's it? All right, so reasonable interpretation,
Yes.
adequate data,
Yes.
Yes.
and in compliance.
Yes.
All right, that was faster than we thought. You just, where are you down on that one? All right, so you've got, David, something on ends monitoring, how the
Yes.
budget affects the ends?
Yeah, so it's in your packet, we provided it. And again, this was a desire of the board and kind of our ongoing ends monitoring, particularly connected to budgeting. So what's in your packet is exactly that, our ends and the connected work to the budget. I would recommend that you can move this to another meeting, but, we could quickly go through it. But I think if you take a look at it, what we're trying to do is connect the work of our ends and how they're associated with the budgeting process. And this is particularly connected to our MTSS work and our long-range plan work. So it's not always easy necessarily to follow probably, around our ends and then budget, but this is the attempt to do that.
We could also give you the electronic version, which you could then get to the links that.
Oh, that would be good.
Yeah.
We'll do that.
So
Then
shall
bring it
we, do
back.
you want to move this to
Future.
a future agenda then? The board okay with that? Okay. All right, so agenda item 13, setting the agenda for the October 7th meeting.
So you need to add 2.3.
No, we just did.
We just
Or,
did that.
no, not that one, ends monitoring, sorry. God.
It was too easy, you didn't think we did.
Mm-hmm. Budget.
Do we want to put an update
Master
on
plan.
the master plan?
Yeah, I think we better do that.
I might not be at that meeting. If I am, it'll be by phone.
Okay.
It depends on whether I get good reception in the duck blind in Michigan.
And how about, will we be in a position to have a report out by high school administration?
On the master planning and visioning?
No.
Oh, yes, oh, God, I got them combined. Jeez, tell you it's late. I think that would be appropriate
Okay.
to assume, yes.
All right.
If there's some reason it can't happen, but
So
I'll
we'll
let
put
you know,
those
but
two
I
in.
think it's fine.
Okay, any concerns or questions on future agenda items?
So I want to just, I added one to the future agenda item. You might not like that, but I just added it as a placeholder, but meet with the boosters.
Mhm.
I would like to, we put some work into fundraising, John and a lot of folks, and there's been a little bit of some question around fundraising, and I think, the boosters been around a long time. It'd be good for maybe them to come and present kind of their desired fundraising ideas and wants, and allow that to help inform you a little bit more about the work we're doing around fundraising specific to our policy. So this is one area, gold cards, as you probably know, that was a student, they were selling those. And we really stopped that as a result of not necessarily knowing the places we're going, and it just felt disconnected to the wants and the needs, and it was kind of a want and not necessarily what we need it for. That said, I think that the boosters have some good ideas But I didn't have that at that time, and I said no to the gold cards being sold by students. The boosters are currently selling, but that's just one example that I think, I'd like for the board to be a little bit informed about the boosters and what they do, and know a little bit more about that before I make some decisions. So I've added that. Whether you want to keep it on or not, it's up to you.
So just a clarification here. The foundation update that was supposed to happen in conjunction with report 2.4, is that now going to happen at the October 7 meeting?
Right.
So it's buried in the 2.4 monitoring report?
Yes, so if they're there, then we'll have them.
So that's
Yeah.
effectively moved to October, okay?
And again, that will be fairly small because we don't have a lot of activity going on with the foundation. But nonetheless, it exists.
Just
so
bookkeeping.
It's got it.
Is there any activity? There's not any, is there?
No, I think there's some activity. I mean, I don't want to speak to that too much.
We've got to effectively replace those check marks.
Yeah, no, there's some activity going on. We have reunion classes, and there's some money that's been designated into that. I don't want to embellish or diminish, but.
All right, the minutes of August 31st, any changes? Seeing none, those are approved, accepted. And the minutes of September 2nd. Seeing none, those are approved. Do you want to walk through the consent agenda, David?
Mm-hmm. As soon as I get there. So under consent agenda, we have some hires, which is also articulated in your new hire report. Again, these are some changes that have happened at the high school as a result of some leaves. So those are filling both at the high school and mathematics, and at the high school in English. So those are reflected there in your consent agenda.
Can I ask a question
Mm-hmm.
about that, specifically about the hire of Chris Allen? Didn't we hired him last meeting for .5 for this same section, correct?
Correct.
So we're now.
We're adding some addition, but it was not posted, and this was an addition that was needed. So again, in order to go through the proper posting processes, this could not have been approved at the previous one.
Is it in the budget?
Yes.
Okay.
It's still at NISA.
It's still Nisa Coppola?
Yeah, that's
she had
right.
28, now
Okay.
he's got it all.
Okay, thanks.
And you do not require action on this?
Didn't I say I was gonna, we don't. We're consistent there, but I typically just like action, but you don't need it as long as you're good, unless you pull it off.
All right, any other questions on the consent agenda? Any questions on AP orders 8, 9, and 9A?
I did have one. I just wanted to understand the Agency of Education payments. Grant unspent funds and unspent grant funds.
Well, yeah, there's.
Surely.
There were two grants that, one was tobacco grant, and we don't spend it, we have to send them back. That's what happened here. And we can apply for them again as a carryover, but this is the process for doing it.
Okay, so is this something that we applied for thinking we'd use it and then we didn't use it?
Mhm.
And do we know why we didn't use it? Is that material?
I know, my office knows, I don't recall here.
Stuart?
This one.
The tobacco, I don't know how much is the amount for there?
It's the 4,000 was the tobacco grant.
How much?
$4,000.
4,000. So there are two parts of the tobacco grant, which is about $14,000 grant. Part of it is for the SAP here at this school, and so she might not have worked as many hours as we had contracted for. That was part of it. And the other piece was that it was for dialogue nights. And so some of those dialogue nights happen. Actually, some of the expensive dialogue nights have been paid before, like the high school knew, but they didn't apply for the money, so we couldn't pay them back, retroactive, because you can't do that. We've got a tighter control on that for this year. But that's where it is. I can answer for the tobacco grant.
The other one I'll look up for you.
Okay.
I know.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right, no other questions, and on, looks like we have an action required on 2 AP orders.
Yep, because they exceeded. So AP order, this is, I think, let's see, 9A or 9, is that right, 9? 9A is regarding the Pitney Bowes, which is our
That's not it. We have two big checks.
Two big checks, yeah.
No, they're separate, yeah, we got them.
What am I on, John?
Negley and Chase and
9.
Howard Center.
So Negley and Chase, John, is to finish out our work.
At the windows.
At
They had
the windows
two
with
contracts.
high school.
Yeah. And the Howard Center,
Is for that
it's a big
contract.
payment because there's a lot of different services they provide, but it's always the school-based clinician contract that puts it over the limit.
Yeah.
Any questions? Do I have a motion to approve the 2 AP order checks to Negley and Chase and to the Howard Center?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And barring any other announcements, David, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
9:55.
We are adjourned.
Mhm.